Hello and welcome to a very special Rest is Politics live stream on perhaps the most consequential of the many elections of this year, the election to choose the next president of the US, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. When the UK went to the polls, we had a very good idea who was going to win, Labour. When Russia went to the polls, we were even more certain Putin was nailed on. But this one really is so hard to call, and it is so important, well beyond America's borders. The global economy and trade, wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, the future of NATO, the climate crisis, the future, some have argued, of democracy itself. I'm Alastair Campbell here in New York with my regular Rest is Politics partner, Rory Stewart, just flown in from Australia. Former Donald Trump comms man and fundraiser, Anthony Scaramucci from the Rest is Politics US. Guardian journalist, Marina Hyde from the Rest is Entertainment. And for all things historical, Dominic Sandbrook from the Rest is History. This really is a very special Rest is election event. We'll be with you every step of the way to try to inform, entertain, hopefully explain what it all means, why it all matters. This is the first of 3 live streams we're planning in the next 24 hours. This will run from 8 p.m. UK time, it's just gone 3 p.m. here in New York right now, to midnight in the UK. 5 hours later, we'll be back for another 4-hour stint, that's 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. UK time, midnight to 4 a.m. here. As Tim Walsh keeps reminding us, there's plenty of time for sleep when we're all dead. So, before we get ready to head home, there'll be a third live stream at 7 p.m. UK time, by which time, hopefully things will be a little clearer. There is so much to talk about even before the votes are counted. There'll be so much more to talk about as and when they are. And through it all, we'll be joined by an exciting array of guests, politicians, policy experts, strategists, pollsters. First up will be former Foreign Secretary David Miliband in about an hour. This is not the Rest is Football. Predictions will be kept to a minimum. But before we get going, I'm going to go round the panel. I'm going to ask them all for a one-word answer to the big question, who is going to win, Harris or Trump? And I asked the question even while knowing none of us know the answer, and that is the wonder of democracy. Because all across this vast country, millions have voted, millions more are voting now, and by the time we head for home, hopefully, we will know the answer to the big question. Will it be President Harris in the White House, or, for a second time, President Donald Trump? So, panel, one word. I'm starting with you, Rory. Harris or Trump?
Harris.
Okay. Anthony Scaramucci, Harris or Trump?
Harris.
Marina Hyde?
Harris?
Harris, but not sure. Dominic Sandbrook?
Someone's got to say it. To Trump.
Okay. Are you saying it because you believe it, or are you saying it because you think that we're a bunch of wet liberals down
Obviously a bit of both.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it is 50-50. I think it's too close to call. And Trump has a history in 2016 and again in 2020 of doing a little bit better in places where people don't expect. And I think given that, you'd be mad not to bet on him a third time.
Okay. Anthony, when you say, we often in politics, we let our heart rule our head sometimes. Is your heart slightly ruling your head? Because this is a guy you don't like very much.
I'm probably trying to wish this and manifest this so they don't end up at Guantanamo Bay after he wins. So I'm certainly on that adversary list. But I think Dominic would have been right in 2016 and possibly even in 2020 in terms of the underpolling. But these pollsters have overcorrected, so I'm going with my spirit brother Rory, who I think is right about this. I think the pollsters right now don't know where to go. The traditional way to gather this information is no longer working, and I think that they may be off. And
I thought I was your spirit. I'm the guy that got you in here and got the public to like you and see you as a nice guy.
You're more of my spirit communicator.
Okay.
He's more of my spirit. He's my spirit optimist.
The same generation.
Okay.
He's my spirit optimist. When I'm worried that I'm going to Guantanamo Bay, I see Rory's face, and I feel very good about myself.
You feel the special forces coming in to get you. Marina, you looked a bit nervous.
When I see Dominic, I get very worried because Dominic's got that vest on, and that vest.
We call it a waistcoat.
Yeah, it's a waistcoat. It's not a vest. Let's be clear.
Inspires confidence.
Okay.
So Rory, you got to help me with this over here.
I'll come 3-piece next time.
Okay. Marina,
you do that,
looked a little bit nervous when you said Harris.
Well, you heard it in my voice, Alastair. It's like that line from that John Cleese movie, it's not the despair, it's the hope. I hope I'm going to see the first female president of the United States, but I have been hurt before by the same guy, and I'm not entirely sure, but I very much hope that to be the way.
Rory, you've been, as our listeners know, you've been absolutely certain for quite some time. You've never wavered in that. So what's that about?
So I think first thing, agreeing with Anthony, the polling companies are much more broken than people understand. They've miscalled elections catastrophically for a very long time now. They were doing it actually even with Reagan, but recently, since people stopped answering their landlines, it's become more and more dodgy. And you can see evidence of this. They're all hovering around 50-50. They shouldn't be. If there's a 3% margin of error, there should be much more divergence in their polls. That's a sign they've lost their nerve. So ignore the polls, look at the fundamentals.
Okay, I'm glad you said ignore the polls, Rory, because I think we should ignore the polls now. I think we should stop talking. I cannot.
I don't think you gave your prediction, though, did you?
I didn't know.
No, what's your prediction?
My prediction is I'm a bit Marina. It's Harris, but tell me the fundamentals so I'm persuaded.
I don't like Alastair's like facial expressions when he says Harris. Rory.
Yeah, but I'm a professional pessimist.
So the popular vote will be driven by whether the economy is in recession. It's not. It'll be driven by whether there's been some catastrophic foreign war. There hasn't been. It's going to be driven by the fact that Trump has been performing worse and worse since 2016, 18, 20, 22. I also believe the Democrats learned some lessons from not targeting properly in 2016. Mm-hmm. And finally, I think the most important thing, young women vote more than young men, and this is quite a gendered election.
Rory, on your fundamentals, though, a lot of those fundamentals would have favoured Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she did, of course, win the popular vote.
I knew you were going to say that. So
yeah.
I'll put in that little bit about the fact that I think they've learned the lesson.
Right.
I mean, she ignored some of the key swing states, and you can understand why, because the states will be talking about a great deal over the next 12 hours. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan were seen as pretty safe Democratic states. They were astonished to see them go to the Republicans.
Blue wall,
but they won't be astonished
yeah.
this time. Yeah.
Now, we're going to be giving you, as well as the insights and perceptions of this splendid array of talent on the panel, we're also going to be lots of graphics through the night. But most importantly, we want your questions. And you can send us your questions and observations. Go in the YouTube chat, and you can just fire them away. We might do the odd poll along the way, even though, as I've said, we're not going to talk about the other polls. Our polls are fine. And the other thing you can do is just go on Twitter and other social media channels, just put #TripLive and send your questions in, and we'll get through as many as we can. Now, we've got hopefully a pretty global audience, and not as global as The Rest is History, which
kind.
is, by the way, I must get this out of the way.
That's kind.
While you've been away, Rory, I, as you know, boast regularly about how we regularly top the charts in the UK.
Yeah. Only in the UK. Though.
In the UK. Dominic's podcast is currently number 2 in the whole of the US behind Mr. Joe Rogan.
Thank you.
That's enough. Right, we've done that's it. But
I just think the one thing people should take from today is you really should listen to The Rest is History, and you can join the Rest is History Club at therestishistory.com.
You can see his waistcoat. You can see his waistcoat on YouTube.
Listen, you should have just taken the compliment and then
for you Americans listening in.
Now, what I do want to talk about is a lot of our listeners and viewers are Brits.
Yeah.
And we're probably thinking, why have we just turned on, or we're going to turn on when the polls close? Why don't we just get told, like we did in Britain, it's a Labour landslide? What's the difference that goes on between Britain and American elections, and why actually it could be days before we know who's the president?
Well, I think the first really big difference with Britain that everybody's got to take on board is this electoral college thing. I think many people who really love politics in Britain have still not fully taken on board the fact that it's winner takes all. In Britain, when you look at America, they're not taking on board the fact that if Harris manages to take Pennsylvania by a couple of hundred votes, all the electoral college votes from Pennsylvania go to Harris. And that means that there can be this huge discrepancy between the popular vote and the electoral college vote, which in a very, very surprising way. Second thing that's changed, 2016, if we'd been doing this, all the results were coming through very, very quickly. By midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, Eastern time, people knew what was happening. Last time round, 2020, it dragged on into the weekend. COVID, mail. It's probably, if it's close, and I'm hoping it's not going to be close, I hope actually Kamala Harris is going to win, and she's going to win by a decent margin. But if it's close, it could drag on quite a long time as Pennsylvania faffs around with its mail.
We should say to people, because there will be lots of stuff circulating on social media, people will probably, I suspect Donald Trump will go out fairly early and say, I have won this. There will be a lot of disinformation.
Which he did last time.
Which is what he did last time. But this time he's got Mr. Musk backing him. So I think people should be very, very wary when they see stuff on social media, even on the TV that says this race is over, even in this state or that state, we should wait. But Anthony, you were kind of nodding but looking a bit
I
grim-faced.
want to
Yeah,
ask
of course,
Rory, the question I have for you is, what would surprise you? Because, like, obviously none of us know. I do think you're correct, by the way. But what would have to happen for your assumptions to change?
I think one thing is that the way that we talk about the swing states is very much based on just taking the 7 states where it was closest last time and saying they're going to be the swing states this time. But if you look at the data going back over the last 5 elections, the top 7 swing states changes every time. You know, states were in play, Florida, Ohio, New Hampshire, within relatively recent memory. So one of the big things that could change this whole thing is that states that we assume that we're calling either for the Republicans or Democrats and aren't on that list of the top 7 that everyone's obsessed with may suddenly move, and that could change things a great deal.
The shy swing state.
Yeah.
There's the ones that are hiding back.
And the other thing that would make someone like me very, very worried is if a really big state like Pennsylvania gets called for Donald Trump, because that's a lot of electoral college votes going the wrong direction.
If you look at the screen now, so there's Pennsylvania, 19 electoral college votes. That's why people go on about Pennsylvania being, as it were, the most important. North Carolina 16, Georgia 16, Michigan 15, Arizona 11, Wisconsin 10, Nevada 6. Anthony, you've actually been campaigning in Pennsylvania for Kamala Harris. I mean, 15 years ago, did you ever imagine that was the turn your life would take?
Not in my wildest dreams, but I did do that, and I actually knocked on some Trump doors, and I sent those pictures out to everybody just to fire everybody up. And
Seemed to work.
It did seem to work, and that's probably why I'm going to Guantanamo, Alastair, if Rory's wrong. But I was impressed with her ground game. And just quickly, 807,000 doors knocked on in the last 24 hours, 940,000 calls made from their phone bank into Pennsylvania in the last 24 hours. Donald Trump is not doing that. And this is a get out the vote election. And those things have proven to be very effective in years past. There's one thing I don't like. I'd like to get other panelists to respond on. She's plus 406,000 votes on the early voting on a net basis. They said that she needed to be closer to 700,000. Obviously, Joe Biden was 1 million. I don't know, are you guys worried about that? The campaign says they're not worried about that, but I'm wondering if they're just saying that.
So this comes down, I think, to turnout, which is going to be really important. Can Kamala Harris turn out particularly good? Are all the women that she needs going to turn out to vote? Is she going to suffer among Latinos, black men, and so on? And you can have a great machine. I mean, I think the Democrats definitely have a better machine than the Republicans. But can you actually get those people to give up their time to go to the polls? That's the key question.
I want to come back to the women with you in a moment, Marina. But Dominic, just give, where did the Electoral College come from?
Okay,
Why do we have this Electoral College? And do we actually think it's a remotely sensible system?
So the reason the system was set up is that, Rory mentioned 2016.
Yeah.
2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she didn't win the election because in 1787, the Constitutional Convention, when they devised the system, they wanted the different states, that's i.e. the former British colonies, they wanted them to have
You didn't have to mention that. You didn't have to
Yes,
mention
he did. You're outnumbered. Keep quiet.
They hadn't met their legal obligations to pay their taxes, and this is where you end up, Anthony.
Oh my God.
Here's how it works.
Just pray that we stay in the alliance. Okay, so if you need saving again, we'll be over there for you. But go ahead, keep
Well, I'm
going.
not sure about it, Trump.
Right.
I can't believe
We'll
we've gone
talk
about
about
later.
Okay, so the different states wanted to preserve a sense of having an independent voice and it not being sort of overwhelmed by the mass of votes from the big states, so the small states were still going to say. So effectively what they constructed was, I mean, the way that listeners could think of it is like a board game. There are 538 electoral college votes, like points at stake, and you get to 270, and if you get to 270, you are the winner. And the argument for it is that if you can imagine if the EU had a presidential system, you would want the different member states of the EU to have a sense of having an independent, unified voice. That it's not that, the voters in Greece or Norway, or not Norway, the voters in Greece or Sweden or Denmark or whatever are not going to be overwhelmed.
But the Germans would have the most power?
The Germans would have the most power, but that's exactly how it works here. California, Texas, Florida, New York have the biggest sway, but you can overwhelm that by amassing a lot of the smaller states. So we know that both of these candidates are going to get 200 plus. I think that's pretty certain. But it's going to come down to these 7 key battlegrounds, of which Pennsylvania, with its 19 electoral college votes.
Or not. That's where I'm prepared to sort of
Well, you
challenge
think,
you.
you think Iowa's going to swing?
I think what we'll find by the end of the night is that those are not the 7 key, and we're going to
Which
find some
ones do you
surprises.
think?
What's gonna flip?
Who's in the candidate?
Iowa,
for
for example. Yeah, we're not talking about Iowa.
There was that big poll at the weekend.
No one had
One
talked
poll.
about Iowa
Yeah.
the whole
I will
election.
confirm
Suddenly
that.
everyone was
Yeah.
talking about Iowa.
Yeah.
If things start going bad, I want to switch seats with Alastair so I can be comforted
Close
by
to your
my
brother.
spirit brother. Yeah.
Marina, can I ask you this? There's been a lot of talk in this election campaign about the gender gap. Do you think that has been accelerated by the fact that Kamala Harris became the candidate replacing Joe Biden? Do you think it's real? Or my sense, just having been here, what do I know? I've been here a few days, but my sense is actually it's less a gender gap, but there's maybe a gap between younger women and older women. But the younger women really, Kamala Harris really is looking to younger women to drive this home.
She is. I mean, if you look at what is the biggest issue, whereas for among other demographics, it's the inflation, the economy. Among women under 45, it is abortion and it is reproductive rights. And also, a lot of women who can remember being under 45 really, really mind about this. I have to say that one of the things I find most depressing about this election, wherever we end up, is that the Republican candidate, at least 26 women have accused him of sexual assault. That is extraordinary. If you think about any of the other people who've ever run for this office, at least 26 women have accused him of sexual assault.
And plenty more who have said that they don't want to take it.
That they don't want to say
publicity.
anything.
Yeah.
And we have not had one day, let alone 1 week, where that has been the blown up issue and everyone has talked of nothing else.
Incredible.
Despite the fact that more women have come forward. Where I take sort of heart, what I think is interesting, is when you see these people these young women who were 10. Okay, say you're voting in this election. You were 10 when the Access Hollywood tape came out, when Trump said, oh, you can just grab women by the pussy, you can do all this. And they've discovered that via TikTok. They haven't seen, they were 10 at the time.
No, there's this amazing phenomenon, this thing that's taken on TikTok of young girls just being filmed, listening to Trump saying what he's saying, and it's stunning.
It's a whole new way of them discovering it and thinking, sorry, what? And so I take a lot of heart from that. But there's a huge amount, you see all the stuff, and today when networks were showing everyone who's voting, there are so many mothers and daughters and grandmothers and mothers and daughters
voting
making
together.
a point of going together and saying, this is why I'm doing, and wanting to speak to TV cameras to say, this is why I'm doing.
I want that woman who went to the polling booth dressed as a character from The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
I don't imagine she's watching, but if she is, can she please phone in? I would love to talk to her. Mooch.
We're sitting in a beautiful office building, and Donald Trump has disappointed tens of thousands of subcontractors that have made buildings like this. Electricians, sheetrock people, plumbing people. I was very surprised that the Harris team didn't elaborate more on what you're saying, Marina, but also how about getting all the people together that their bills were never paid. They put value into his buildings, and he didn't pay them. And then he's out on the campaign, says, my microphone's not working, I'm going to fire the person or not pay them. And yet he has this very strong support. So what is that about, Alastair? Why are these people glued to him in a way that would be impossible for any other garden variety politician?
Rory and I have done lots of interviews on the podcast in recent weeks, asking this very, very, very question. We had it with Michael Lewis last week, with Frank Luntz when we were over the DNC in Chicago. Their line to us is that we so loathe the guy that we can't even begin to understand why people like him. And I still find that very, very difficult. But Frank Luntz really made an impact on me, because I've tried to see it now. One of the guests we're going to be talking to later is Peter Hyman, who's a former colleague of mine in Downing Street. He's actually been going around the country. He's going to all the rallies, and he'll be fascinating because he has, I think, got a better sense now of why people like him. But I'll be honest, Anthony, I just don't understand how he's even on the ballot, let alone that people are voting.
I got it in 16, but I do not understand it after 8+ years of additional data. I'm sorry, Maria.
No, I was going to say, doesn't he represent a kind of unboundaried fantasy of how you could be if you didn't have no rules applied to you, you were as rich as you like, and you could just say anything you thought at any time? It's such a contrast with her. She has to be perfect and he has license to say anything he wants.
There's plenty of double standards going. Now listen, this wonderful setting, and we're right over where the 9/11 attacks happened. It's incredibly beautiful down there how they've reshaped that space. Beautiful view. It will get dark in an hour or so, but this did not come cheap. We have to have sponsors, and we're going to be telling you who the sponsors are. So Rory, you are going to tell people about one of our favourite sponsors, that is NordVPN.
Well, huge thank you to NordVPN, who has been sponsoring this live stream with us tonight. Very, very useful when you're traveling. Switch on NordVPN. We've all got it going on our different laptops and phones to protect you from malicious websites, stop people tracking you illegally. You can try it out yourself. nordvpn.com/restispolitics for the best discount available. Give it a go. Got it going on my phone. You should have it going on yours.
By the way, I must say to people, if at any
It's
point...
like unbelievably enthusiastic.
I know, it's great. If people think that either of us look tired at any point, I had about 3 hours sleep last night, but Rory has literally just got off a plane from Australia. So, you okay?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
okay.
It's okay. Your friend the Mooch hired you a great makeup artist, and I think the two of you look splendid.
Who used to be Trump's makeup artist.
Dominic, don't laugh that hard because you got a lot of
Are we allowed to say that she used to be Trump's makeup artist?
Yeah, she was Trump's makeup artist.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You know,
Can I make this a little
of course,
bit
she
more
doesn't like
serious?
him like everybody else.
Rory was serious. Rory, serious alert.
1 second. So you're saying that you understood it in 16, but Access Hollywood, which are these tapes where he talks about grabbing pussy, is 2016.
Yeah.
And when that happened, a lot of very senior Republicans thought he was finished. Paul Ryan came out, a lot of them came out. It was
They wanted him to drop out of the... I was in the meeting.
Right.
They wanted him to drop out of the campaign.
race. And that was the point at which he seemed to sort of jump the shark. That was the moment at which suddenly it was revealed that all the rules that we thought normally applied to politics didn't apply anymore.
I see. By the way, they haven't included my prediction on. They're not even taking me down as a Harris man. I'm not a predictor on this. I'm
Where's
just
my
an
question
absolute
mark after
enthusiast.
Harris?
Yeah, and Marina wants a question mark.
I can't believe I got Trump next to my name.
Listen, can we just?
Marina, come on. Show
No.
self-confidence.
I
Can we
know, but
just-
I've been
Woman
hurt before,
power,
like I
woman
said.
power. I mean, come on.
Can we just?
No question mark. Don't be ambivalent.
Can we just talk a little bit about what people keep talking the paths to victory? Who wants to tell me the paths to victory for? Let's take Harris first.
So if Harris wins Pennsylvania, then what? She needs Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think she's pretty much there.
Yeah.
Done.
If she wins the Great Lakes kind of Rust Belt, if she loses Pennsylvania, then she needs to pick up. Then that means it's a little bit
Georgia,
dicey. And there's
Nevada,
great.
North
Then she's looking at
Carolina.
the Sun Belt: Georgia, North Carolina.
And how many of those would she need?
She would need. She could
At least
win
2.
Yeah.
At least 2. Okay.
To make up for
Okay.
the 19. So you got
Yeah.
Pennsylvania.
You got a
Because Pennsylvania
14 and a
19
6.
is a lot.
You're okay. Nevada would do it with North Carolina.
The trouble is, if you're down in one, that probably means that you're going to be down in the others by a couple of points as well.
Do the belts, the Sun Belt, the Rust Belt, do they always go together? No.
No, but there's something that is happening, and I think Rory will like this, because the Harris campaign has actually studied this. The demography of Virginia and North Carolina are starting to look very, very similar. And so the campaign said last night, if we're plus 10 in Virginia, we're going to win in North Carolina. They really do believe that. If she wins North Carolina, and of course those polls close at 7, we'll know that by 9 to 10 o'clock tonight, she wins. And because other things will fall into place for her.
One of the things that's making this so terrifying for people is that the last 2 elections were far closer than the 2008-2012 elections. So 2008-2012 were like 3 or 4 states which were decided by tiny margins. But in the last 2 elections, it's like 7 or 8 states decided by tiny margins. So Michigan 2016 was taken by 0.2. 2020 Georgia taken by 0.2%. Arizona by 0.3%. Pennsylvania in 2016 by 0.7%. So these are a few thousand votes going in each direction.
I once saw a movie, actually, called, just to raise the tone here, called Swing Vote, which is the entire US election is entirely tied, and it comes down to the vote of one person, Kevin Costner. Right, not actual Kevin Costner, he is playing
Well,
a
hold on a
kind
minute.
of...
I'll make up.
Yeah.
my
She does Kevin Costner.
Also did Kevin Costner, yeah.
He likes
So-
Kevin Costner more than Trump, just so
Yeah,
you know. Okay.
yeah.
And
Give
it,
you that newsflash.
but this is telescoped on not a whole lot more people than that. There are these tiny margins, these tiny numbers of people.
And I was looking.
Kevin, how did he vote?
Well, this is the thing. Okay, bear in mind, I saw this on a plane a long time ago, and it's only a 5 out of 10. The candidates have to have 10 days to go at him and trying to change his mind, and they flip-flop and they do all this stuff. And at the end, we just see him casting his vote, but we don't know what it is. But he has repaired his relationship with his daughter, which is the B plot.
Oh.
And so they keep
we don't know
it
who
open.
wins.
No, we don't know
That's
who wins.
hopeless.
Well, tell it to the director.
Yeah.
Well, but there's a great meme out there that is on TikTok. Dad, how are you voting? I'm voting for you.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice. Just Dominic, just go. I just want to pin down the on the path to victory. Let's go to Trump.
Yeah.
How does he get there?
So Trump wins Pennsylvania. I think he hasn't won the whole ball game, as they say, but he's half the way there. He then needs just a couple of others, I think, if he gets Pennsylvania.
Oh, so
I think he's going to win Arizona, personally. I don't know whether Anthony agrees with that.
So I think he's going to win Arizona. They think they're going to win Nevada, but there's something called Trump. But there's something called the Reid machine. Now, when you bring that up to Trumpers, they say, well, Harry Reid has died. And what's the Reid machine? Harry Reid set up a system there of tremendous amounts of Democratic patronage, and union officials, caterers, people that work in those casinos, they show up and they vote across the board Democrats. And so they are always underpolled. This is why that gentleman who does that big report in Nevada, even though it was 0.3 plus for Harris, he called the state for Harris because of the Reid machine.
Can I ask you a question, Anthony?
Yes.
So Nevada, Arizona, states like that, a lot of Latino voters. And the Puerto Rico garbage thing hasn't hurt Trump with them as much as... And in fact, he's doing pretty well among Latinos, right? Compared with previous Republican
42%
candidates.
of men.
This is the thing we should say. This is the thing at the Madison Square Gardens rally that he had. And a comedian, a guy called Tony Hinchcliffe, came up and he said that there's a great big island of garbage. It's called Puerto Rico.
Which wasn't even very funny, was it?
And it's been. I mean, they talk about he'll be in Guantanamo Bay too with you. I think they never want to see that guy again. That is really. I think
he's going to be on the wall like in The Handmaid's Tale. I actually think there's some Trumpers that actually genuinely like the fight in me. So I'll end up in Guantanamo being tortured. But I just tell you the different things that they'll do to people. But the thing about the Latino vote, I think he got really hurt at Madison Square Garden.
Hurt it.
And so that you heard it, wherever you guys say it in the UK.
Yeah.
42%, I'd be very surprised if he's still there.
Right.
Because a lot of people looked around and say, wait, what? What is he saying? See, and what happens with Trump, because he is running on misogyny, he's running on racism, he's running on cruelty, he's running on anti-immigration. They're looking around saying, oh, he means them. He doesn't mean me. And now they're looking around saying, oh, wait a minute. He actually means me. You see, and that's what's happening right now in the last 10 days of this election.
Very worth looking at states like Arizona, because they're a sign of how quickly America's changing. So I was in Phoenix, Arizona a few weeks ago. It's a state where every decade a huge number of new people are coming in. Some decades, there's nearly 50, 60% of the population turning over. And there are, in places like Phoenix, a lot of young, educated people who are moving there. There's a massively difficult immigration story, but also I was seeing a lot of people in Arizona who voted Trump last time who are now going to vote Democrat. So I'm endlessly over-optimistic, but I'm going to challenge both Dominic and Anthony on that. I think Arizona also could go.
Can I tell you a funny story about Arizona?
Was Kevin Costner in it?
No, it's not. But a Veep guy. This was from a Veep guy. One of the guys in
I sense
Veep.
a little jealousy from Alastair and Kevin.
One of the guys who was in Veep was saying that he'd been speaking to people who were down in Arizona, and the Trump campaign discovered that there are all these guys which have, the yard signs and the bumper stickers, and they're for Trump, but they weren't registered to vote. So they were saying. And when they kind of, approached them about it, they said, yeah, but it's like you guys say, the elections, they're all rigged, there's no point. And they were like, well, yeah, but no, that's definitely true, but you need to vote in this one. And they're like, yeah, but what's the point? Because they're all rigged. And like, yeah, no, they are. But they've got themselves into this ridiculous kind of paradox where this kind of philosophical paradox where they have to say, yeah, all elections are rigged and really bad, but you definitely need to vote in this one for our candidate.
I think it was interesting about Arizona and this thing about the swing states don't all stay the same. So 1980 to 1992, it voted Republican. 1996, Democrat. Then it went back to Republican, 2,216. And last time, Democrat. So if it flips again, Rory, you're in trouble.
I am in trouble. Nevada, Arizona, also examples these states where it votes one way with the president and can have a governor from the other party as well. So these are always states to look at. They may not all of them are on the swing state list, but any state where you have a governor from a different party to the presidential vote, one's worth looking at.
So North Carolina is the most fascinating, if you don't mind me just bringing it up, because the Republican is an African American that calls himself a black Nazi. He's up against a guy named Stein, who's up 13 right now. The campaign, again, the Harris campaign, saying if he stays up 13, she's got an unbelievable chance to win the state of North Carolina. That's 14 electoral votes. And then she doesn't need to win Pennsylvania. She could just win Nevada, and she's the American president. So when Biden left the race, there was one path for Harris on the 22nd of July. It was the blue wall, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And now she's got 7 or 8 different paths to get to the presidency. And so that's why I like her odds. And I also like her machinery, because we know the machinery works. Hillary did not work the machinery the way the vice president is and her team.
What was your sense in Pennsylvania of talking to people? I mean, I know it's presumably you get picked up, they take you to the right places, you're seeing the people they want you to see. But what was your sense of what's actually going to happen, what people were saying to you?
So my sense in Pennsylvania is that she's going to get the vote from the African Americans that she needs. And this poo-pooing that the African American men are not going to vote for her. I did 3 town hall meetings over a weekend, 10 days ago, with African American males discussing this topic. You guys may know who Charlemagne the God is. Yep. He's been out there doing calls for her. He's been out there promoting this stuff. And so my sense is going to turn out. But one of Shapiro's family members mentioned to one of my friends that...
As the governor.
Yeah, this is Governor Josh Shapiro. One of his family members mentioned to one of my friends today that the turnout in Philadelphia from the African American community is way higher. They've actually been underpolled by the pollsters. Remember, she's African American, she's an Indian Asian woman, and they want her to win. And you can pretend otherwise, but they want her to win.
And we've also got to remember that these governors, Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer, really key popular surrogates in key states. And they're on Kamala Harris's side. They're from her party.
But it's the machinery, too. Remember, the governor controls the state. He's putting the flex on everybody. You got to show up and vote for my candidate.
What has happened to the Trump campaign's machinery, which is absent in many, many places? And
maybe at the commercial break, I'll have you call Lara Trump, okay, and just say, hey, Lara, excuse me, where did the money go? Because we're all trying to figure it out, okay? The Republican candidates didn't get the money. Did you give it the legal fees? Should we give her a call?
We can call.
Lara, where'd the money go? Because I'm actually dying to know the answer.
We're going to talk about both the campaigns after a break in a minute. But just going back to the Electoral College, finally, Dominic, has there ever been any attempt to change it, or is it impossible?
No, there have been lots of attempts.
And why does it? I mean, it feels like a crazy system to me. I mean, there's good and bad in all systems. So who tried to change it, and why did they fail?
But before you answer that, I'm talking about the tyranny of the minority, why that was so important to the founders.
So what people were always frightened about was that, so in the late 18th century, they don't want they want a balance. They want the majority and the minority to kind of be in a constant equilibrium. What they don't want is a particular group to have a 51% plurality and to dominate everybody else, and the voices of small states in particular to be silenced. That's the great obstacle to changing the system. That if you're in a small state, you're in a Rhode Island or you're in, Nebraska.
What is the funny arrangement with Nebraska that they've got a funny arrangement with?
So Nebraska changed their system in a really interesting way in 1992 because they said, we're completely taken for granted. Nobody ever visits Nebraska. And effectively, because they've hived Lincoln, Nebraska off from the rest of the state, and that has its own electoral college vote, because you don't have to do it in the way they do it. All you need to do is to send electors to the Electoral College. It doesn't have to be winner-take-all, because it's not winner-take-all in Nebraska, not winner-take-all in Maine.
In Maine,
and Nebraska changed relatively recently because they wanted attention. They wanted to be visited by presidential
Oh my
candidates.
God! I mean, imagine how people in Pennsylvania do not want to be visited anymore. They've had quite enough. I feel my
Marina,
sympathies.
they wanted to see me.
Yeah, of course I want to see you.
You're
Everyone's
different.
I was
You're
out there
different.
banging on doors.
Since
taking
the
selfies,
rest
Marina.
of this family made you popular as opposed to this hate figure you used to be, they definitely wanted to see you, Anthony.
But you were never a hate figure, Alastair.
No, never.
Just me. I was the only one that was hated.
Now, I see that Donald Trump has just put out, was it on Twitter or on his Truth Social, that it's stay in line, it's too big to rig. They're already talking about this idea that things have been rigged, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Listen, first of all, I want to thank Spotify. This building that we're in is Spotify's building. And it's nice, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very, very
beautiful,
nice.
beautiful. And we actually can see the Statue of Liberty just
Yeah,
around
the Statue of
the corner.
Liberty.
there.
I posted a beautiful picture of the Statue of Liberty.
Ellis
yesterday.
Island. It is stunning. It's the best
No,
view. It's
beautiful.
unbelievable.
But it's gonna go fairly soon. We're going to take a quick break. Don't forget questions. #TripLive. Go into the chat in YouTube. But we're going to come back after the election, after the break. We're going to talk about the campaigns, Harris and Trump. See you soon.
See you soon.
Welcome back to this live stream from The Rest is Politics here in New York. We're going to be with you till midnight. We're then going to have a little break while we sort of go and find out what the hell's happening out there. And then we're going to be coming back for another 4-hour stint shortly at 5 hours after that. I want to talk about the campaigns. And by the way, do send in your questions in the chat on YouTube, #TripLive if you're on social media. But I want to start off with the two campaigns. First of all, I want to go around the table again, one-word answers. Who has had the better campaign in the round, Harris or Trump?
Well, I think Harris brought a lot of energy in.
I love the way he does one word.
It was
You're tired. You're allowed. You're allowed. No, go on.
Harris.
Go
Harris.
on. You're
Go on.
allowed.
My one word is Harris. Go on.
Okay.
On we go.
Mooch.
Harris.
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 Okay, so we all think Kamala Harris has had a better campaign. I mean, I judge campaigns by whoever wins has the best campaign as far as I'm
Can I
concerned.
put two more sentences in though?
Yeah.
He was killing it until Biden dropped out of the race. Killing it. I said, this guy's, Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita have got him organized. He's actually listening to them. He stopped listening to them long ago. And Susie is leaking to Tim Alberta. If you read that article, it was laugh out loud funny because I know the
Is that
personality.
the Atlantic piece?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Are they his main people?
They're his main people. He brought Corey in, but they tried to.
Corey Lewandowski.
Yeah, they tried to rip Corey to shreds. But Susie basically told Tim Alberta that the morale is at an abject low, and that they're trying to kill each other. And many people
Trying to kill each other.
Well, you know, metaphorically, Alastair. But many people, if he wins, are like, there's no way they could work in the administration because there's just too much bad blood between them.
I'm slightly with you, Alastair, though, because in your half joke, whoever wins has the best campaign. And I'd like to come to Dominic on this. There are definitely historians and political scientists out there who basically say campaigns don't really matter.
Right. And often they don't matter, I think.
And it's after the result, everyone's like, oh, Truman had a brilliant campaign, or Kennedy had a brilliant campaign. And Kennedy actually beats Nixon by this kind of sliver of a margin.
Right, exactly.
And everyone then decides it's all down to an amazing TV debate where one of them sweats and the other one doesn't. And in fact, it was almost certainly
You're dead right.
scientists
The
suggest
debates don't matter by and large, and I think campaigns matter.
But this debate matters because Biden had
Well,
the lead.
Biden destroyed himself in the debate. didn't he?
Mistakes matter, but if she had made mistakes at all, like I said, you know, in the Labour Party for the last election in the UK, they talked about the Ming vase strategy. She's got like 3 Ming vases balanced on top of each other. She could not afford to make any kind of big mistakes at all, and I think she would have been really punished for them. But I agree that she just has to sort of get through it and not drop it.
If you think about where she was in the early summer, when Biden was still the nominee, and people were like, oh, the Democrats could never choose Kamala Harris because everybody hates her. If you think how far she's come since then, even if she loses, she will have fought, I think, a pretty good campaign.
If you were
she's
listening
made
to
very
the
few
rest,
mistakes.
if you were listening to the Rest is Politics US,
We all do.
We all are,
okay, so
always.
what we said in
On
July,
repeat.
she's being underestimated. But I want to leave you with this thought. I'd love to get your reactions to this. There was 90 minutes that took place on the 27th of June that could potentially end Joe Biden's career but also Donald Trump's career.
Yeah.
And Trump is kicking himself. God almighty, why did I let myself have a debate in June? Why didn't I wait for the more traditional times of September and October? Because they would have never been able to have recovered with a secondary candidate.
Tell me this. I've been involved in TV debates with different political leaders, and particularly with Tony Blair, it was always easy to have a very frank discussion with him if something wasn't great. Somebody like Trump, who Kamala Harris absolutely destroyed, in my view.
Yeah.
What do his people say to him after that?
Won the debate.
Really?
Yeah.
You know,
They say
Mr.
that.
President, you won the debate, you were fabulous. But I knew Trump didn't win the debate because...
But what deep down does he know?
He
Oh,
knew.
he knows.
He knew.
No. He knows he lost. He knows he's lying about certain things. He used to walk up onto the campaign plane. And we said, what the hell did you say that for? He said, oh, no, that's okay. If I say it 25 times, they'll start to believe it. And we would just shake our heads and bemoan him. But he knows he lost. I'm going to tell you the tell. Because the vice president invited me. I helped her on debate prep. And she invited me into the spin room, and I was there in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia after the debate.
When Trump came in.
And at 11 o'clock at night, he came in to see his buddy Sean Hannity. And I got to ask you rhetorically, did he do that on the 27th of June? He did not. But he did that night to tell Sean that he won the debate. He got smoked in that debate. And she pressed 3 or 4 buttons on him. He went up like a bottle rocket.
There's a fascinating film emerged today of Trump watching Kamala Harris's speech. And I think at the time of the convention, they actually said he didn't watch it. Clearly another lie. But it was fascinating to watch it because he was basically with the people telling them what to tweet. And it was all angry and it was rageful and but it was fascinating insight to him. And it gave me the feeling that she was inside his head much more than I think he's managed to get inside.
She's
her.
goaded him, the thing about his rallies. That's what really offended him, isn't
absolutely,
it?
yeah.
That's what really gets
people
to him.
are leaving his rallies.
Yeah.
And that's what he's been doing. He's been going to these places like New Mexico
smaller
and
than you
Virginia,
said.
where
That
he
was the first
can
twist.
fill an arena. But he wants to go there in the last days of this campaign because everywhere else is half full and it's clearing while he's speaking.
Yeah.
But if we just step back for one stage, though,
Totally true.
all 6 out of the 7 swing states we're talking about are swing states which were taken by Biden, held by Biden. What does that tell us? That tells us that commentators are viewing this as a very defensive campaign. They basically think that a swing state means holding on to what Biden had. And that tells you that if this goes wrong for Harris, the first thing that will happen is people say they didn't choose the right candidate for the Rust Belt.
Should have had an open.
They should have gone for Josh Shapiro. Why on earth did we get a Californian candidate? And why on earth did we get Tim Walz as the vice presidential candidate? He's not delivering a key swing state here. So when we have Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer as our vice presidential candidate, for someone like me who's optimistic about Harris, I'm very, very struck by the fact that they assume that all the swing states are holding on to things that Biden took rather than what I'm assuming, which is swinging into states that Trump held.
I want to ask Marina about this whole thing about celebrities and endorsements. And so last night, the Kamala Harris event, Lady Gaga was there, some of the huge, Will.i.am was there.
Yeah, it was.
And meanwhile, Elon Musk did an interview with Joe Rogan, during which Joe Rogan, who's the second best podcaster in the United States behind Tom Holland.
That is poor.
That was low, I know. But do you think they matter? Do they have effect? Have there been too many of them?
There have been an unbelievable amount. And by the way, I think some of them are like freelancing by the end. So I saw a video of like Richard Gere, and I was thinking, nobody asked Richard Gere to do this. He's just come out and done this, okay? The only data we really have on this is that and people are saying, Taylor Swift, she's going to swing. That's not the case. But what they do celebrity endorsements, is that they remind people to register to vote, and they encourage their fans to, sign
That's
up
why there's no
and
point doing
volunteer.
it on the last day of the election
For
campaign.
me, I actually think that, one of the things that we know hurts the Democrats is people thinking they're the party of kind of coastal elites, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's been a little too much, maybe a lot too much celebrity in the last few days. But it's not a major criticism, and I don't think it's a...
There were a hell of a lot of celebs who turned out for Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, loads and loads of pop stars, Hollywood stars and whatnot. But of course, they're part of the problem in a sense. Because
Yeah.
if they give you the impression of, this is a
elite,
liberal metropolitan
telling us what to
elite.
do.
I mean, it's got a long history. So, the first big star to endorse a presidential candidate was Al Jolson. In 1924, he endorsed Warren Harding. But it doesn't always work. So
No.
Ronald Reagan,
Well, that didn't.
he had Jimmy Stewart recorded a campaign commercial for Ronald Reagan in 1976 when Reagan didn't even get the nomination.
Right.
So they don't have this kind of mystical.
We had Ginger Spice in 1997. She was great.
One of the things I asked Marina about this, and my sense is that although people admire celebrities enormously, so Stormzy endorsed Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. But my sense is that people are quite smart and they think, okay, I admire Stormzy, but I don't necessarily follow his views on politics. I mean, I noticed a friend of mine got Victoria Beckham to tweet out that she was reading his book, and he was really excited.
She used to say she'd never read a book.
And he was really excited, and he thought, she's got gazillion Twitter followers, and his Amazon sales went up by like 10 books, because presumably people aren't very interested.
But it's more than Boris Johnson's.
Definitely. And actually, there used to be a thing where people thought, oh, someone has got so many Twitter followers that if they say anything, then, oh my goodness, look at how many extra votes that will mean. This is absolute nonsense, and it doesn't mean anything. The only data we have, as I say, is that it does actually make people volunteer, and it makes them register to vote.
Yeah, I suspect we will be talking more about Twitter and Mr. Musk at sometime.
Well, we'll have to have that whole oligarchic talk, but we hated the celebrity endorsements in 2016. And I think I told Alastair this. And I didn't like the concert that the vice president did last night because, again, that comes across as elitist in Pennsylvania. He was in a farm field in 2016, and Hillary Clinton was with John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen and Beyonce and Jay-Z in the Wells Fargo Arena. And I would have said to them, get those 20,000 people who are your volunteers out making phone calls on the last night of the event.
It was the most 2016
we're very
done.
amazed that she was willing to do that.
Yeah.
Now, another of the very, very kind sponsors who are making sure that we can be fed and watered as we go through the night and possibly even have a bed to sleep in at the end of it all are Saley, and you know all about them.
Well, Alastair actually introduced me to Saley, and I love Saley. And so what Saley is, it's a fantastic software that you can download onto your phone, and it actually can eSIM anywhere you are in the world. And so you can avoid roaming charges if you use Saley. And of course, if you're with us, you can get a 15% discount, but you have to go to saley.com/TRIPUS. And so, Alastair, I want to thank you for putting me in the Saley clientele.
Excellent. Okay. Now, you've been sending lots of questions, for which we're very, very, very grateful. And let's have the first one. Here we go. WS. Given polling errors in 16 and 20, are pollsters deliberately predicting a tighter race to avoid the embarrassment? Are they playing it safe to protect their credibility? Marina, what do you think?
Well, I really agree with Rory on this, and I do think that I've never seen... Alastair, it's really bad when the spin doctor becomes the story, but when the pollsters have been this much of the story, it's a form of... This is like a sort of necrotic system.
It's just become an industry.
They feud like rappers, okay? These guys, it's like they're laying down diss tracks.
Nate Silver was even on our podcast. I mean, for heaven's sake.
Well, I said something to Dominic, but I was just having a look at the polls over history. They got it wrong in 48 on Truman. They got it wrong 52. They said it was too close to call when Eisenhower won a storming victory. In 76, they had Carter leading by 33 points when he actually won by 2. They called it a dead heat on Reagan in 80, which he then won. 88, they had Dukakis leading Bush by 17 points in the summer.
I just want to point out...
And had it as a margin.
But these are not election day polls, right? These are polls that
even
often...
even on the election day, Harris was at a margin of error in 88.
Just a minute, as a historian, I love this research, because you've done that on your own, haven't you?
I've done that on my own, yes.
And where did you get all that?
I got that from a historian. In fact, from Mr. Alan Lichtman.
Oh, the 13 keys.
He's got 13 keys.
Excellent. Well,
he's been feuding with Nate Silver.
Tell everybody who Alan Lichtman is. I think it's important.
Okay, so he has brought together, it's a wonderful thing, particularly for someone like me. He basically says, campaigns don't matter, policies don't really matter, ideology doesn't really matter, loyalty to the party doesn't really matter.
He's a nihilist.
What really matters is, do you have an incumbent mandate? How's the economy performing? Have there been any major scandals? Have you got yourself in a military screw-up? The problem is that he is very, very good at predicting the popular vote, but he can get it wrong if the Electoral College flips in the wrong direction.
And what is he-
So just on him. So first of all, on the polls, some of those polls were taken months before election.
Some of them
day.
were, yep.
So you do Dukakis poll.
Yep.
It's like asking who's going to win the World Cup in 3 years' time. or
Scotland.
whatever.
Although
Secondly-
Harris had Dukakis at a margin of error at the moment of the election.
Secondly,
Yeah.
I think the 13 keys thing is absolute and utter gibberish and tosh. I think
I'm with
So does Nate Silver.
I mean,
They
so
had a
does
few.
anybody with any common sense. The idea that there's 13 boxes that you tick and bang, you can predict the result. I
It's a very good PR stunt.
What about this nice
Done it
woman,
very, very
Anne
well.
Selzer, who's...
Yeah,
Now,
great.
She
From Iowa.
said she does not... There's not this kind of dick-waving thing when she talks about her thing. She said this week when she did this Iowa poll that everyone was completely shocked because no one's really talked about Iowa the whole campaign.
Yeah.
She said, yeah, my methodology seems way too simple, but it's worked so far. One day it might not work, and then I'll be blown into little pieces and scattered across the city of Des Moines. None of the men talk like this, okay? I'm a big fan of Anne Selzer.
Okay, next question. J Editor 96. Oh, I think this one's definitely for you, Dominic. Which pre-internet US presidents would have done the best with social media? Abraham Lincoln. He'd done the best with everything.
No, too long-winded. Much too long-winded. He
Okay.
wouldn't fit within the character limit,
Okay.
I think.
Okay. He could have done his own Truth Social.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt would be brilliant.
JFK?
Teddy Roosevelt. JFK would be bland. He'd be a bit vanilla. I think I'd love to. I mean, there is a Dick Nixon Twitter account, which is very good at capturing Nixon's voice.
But Teddy Roosevelt does the kind of stuff that Putin does on Twitter, like bare-chested out there.
He'd do
hunting
photos.
bears
He'd
and-
do stunts,
yeah,
wouldn't he?
yeah.
Absolutely, he would. He'd wrestle a bear in, like in the Rockies or something.
You don't think if George Washington took his wooden teeth out
With
of
his
his
teeth.
mouth,
Yeah.
that would have been a viral thing?
Isn't
on
it a weird
Instagram?
thing that you give us so
Everybody
much
would
grief
be.
about our teeth,
Yeah.
but your founding father didn't even? He had a
Right,
he had a
and
slave's teeth in his
We
mouth.
saw his teeth in the Smithsonian and we fixed ours. Look at these teeth.
And yours are amazing. Yours are
We
amazing.
fixed
Your
it.
teeth are wonderful.
They're almost
And they're mine,
They're almost
okay?
Kloppian.
They are.
On mine.
Look it up. You were going to say.
Kloppian. Is that like a pop and Jay?
So you're asking about who
The-
did
the-
He's
Yeah.
great on Twitter.
is the
Yeah.
best on Twitter? I think TR is Theodore Roosevelt.
So you both
Really
you agree you're agreeing on Roosevelt.
Yeah, Rory's wrong about the 13 keys, but he's absolutely
But he's
right.
right.
What
Yeah,
about
right.
Calvin Coolidge? He was known for his brevity.
Silent Cal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't say anything.
Okay,
Should,
so
should we-
probably
should we
not
be
that.
serious
Not
about
good on
should we
social
be
media.
serious about 13 keys for a moment? So what's happening there is a huge debate where all political scientists and historians, particularly political scientists, less historians, are trying to come up with what's the key thing. Is it loyalty to party? Is it issues? So Lickman as a historian is at least saying it's 13 things, which in a different combination matter. I agree with you. You don't want to turn it into a science, and I'm surprised he's trying to turn it into a science. But what he's basically pushing towards, and this is why I'm cheered up by it, is the idea the American public, in the end, have a certain degree of common sense, and in the popular vote at least, reflect how they think things have been going, the performance over the previous 4 years, and they're less swayed than you would have thought by
So
short-term
Lincoln
campaigns.
said something that we should all remember about America, and I hope it's true tonight. He said that, he was debating Douglas, and we're talking about how smart the common American citizen is, and Lincoln said, they may not be smart academically, but they have a good nose, and they can sense a rotting cadaver in their basement. And it's one of the more famous, obscure things to say, but his point is that, maybe there's more of us than them.
Yeah.
I guess what it comes down to, and what makes all elections so complicated, is first of all, they're always a referendum on the last 4 years, and particularly on the economics of the last 4 years. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? But also, and what makes them hard to predict, is elections are a way for people to proclaim a sense of identity, that tribalism, a kind of cultural issues. And that's the kind of stuff that Donald Trump did well on in 2016. Because, of course, the economy in 2016, the fundamentals, as you put it, Rory, was pretty good.
Yeah.
But Trump won because he spoke to something atavistic, kind of primal, among people who felt left behind.
Michael Lewis said something very interesting on the podcast this week. He said that he genuinely thinks Trump is like the angriest man on the planet. He's angry about everything all the time, and he somehow connects with other people's anger. Do you think there's something in
Well,
that?
I do believe that, and I think Van Jones got it better than anybody. He said that
He's the CNN guy.
Yeah, he's a CNN guy. He said it was a white lash. He said at the end of the day, there's a very large group of people that they see the name White House, and they want a white person in that White House, and they backlashed on everybody.
Final question for now. Eric Batty, I was wondering if you could talk about the recent phenomenon of candidates appearing on podcasts as opposed to traditional media, especially given the popularity of Joe Rogan. Marina?
I think this has been 100% the podcast election. It's really
Really?
interesting. Yeah, because things that they used to do that used to be this kind of landmark campaign staging posts, like, you know, Kamala Harris would do a Vogue cover or whatever. That's nothing. That's like when she went on, like Alex
She looked
Cooper.
great, though.
Well, but it got no traction. People don't talk about it. Things that media endorsements just seem like old hat. I think that I wish she had done Joe Rogan. Trump did Rogan, and I think unraveled a little bit on it, but she should have done Joe Rogan. And this whole market of people, you know, the manosphere is listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
But it was interesting how Trump performed and why because he should be with his rambling style and whatever, he should be great on podcasts. But I tell you what, and I think political podcasts particularly are like a personal growth medium. You know, it's all of you guys owning your mistakes and saying, you know, it made me sad, I didn't like, you know. He can't do that. He would regard apologizing or saying he'd made a mistake as making him the smaller person.
So I got to take the other side of Marina on Rogan because I understand that network around Rogan. Rogan doesn't like Trump.
Yeah.
And he did not want Trump on his podcast. And Trump was trying to get on his podcast for 3 years. And Rogan said no, because he really doesn't like Trump. It has to do with the whole WWE, the Worldwide Wrestling.
Yeah.
Musk convinced Rogan, and Musk muscled Rogan and influenced him.
So when
to put
Rogan
him
said
on.
yesterday he endorses Trump, he doesn't.
And so let me explain. Well, no, he does, because I listened to the whole podcast. If I was on the Harris team, I'd have said, do not go on Rogan, because he's tied to Elon Musk, and it'll be a fait accompli. It'll make you look worse if you go on. And he interviewed both of you, and after he
What do you
did
mean
that,
he's tied to Musk?
he's very tied to Musk. He's in Musk's network. Musk is on the show all the time. Lots of Musk's people are on the show. Joe and Elon Musk are very, very close, and it would have been a trap for her. And I
But
would have
he's
told her
so
not to do it.
enormous. He's so huge.
There were
that-
other podcasts
and-
she could have done.
Yeah,
that
well,
would
in
have
the
been better.
manosphere, because otherwise the Democrats are just saying
Manosphere.
we're giving up on
She
this
could have done the
manosphere.
All In podcast. She could have done the rest of politics, UK or US. But going on Rogan,
Doug
I
did.
think,
But
Doug
that's
did
not
you guys.
manosphere.
I think we got
These
Doug.
disaffected young men, if the Democrats don't try and reach them that way, they're going to have to.
But she would have gotten blasted by him. That's the problem.
They're going to have to reach out to it, or else they're saying that we've
They-
basically given up on these people.
Okay.
Conventional media, very quickly, would never have given Trump 3 hours to talk in that way. I mean, there is something
No,
very
Rogan does,
unusual
yeah.
about the
Yeah.
way that podcasts work.
He sounded
They
like
do
an
give
imbecile on
space.
that podcast. He
They
sounded
really
like a
give-
There was
nutcase.
one moment on a podcast this campaign which I thought was really interesting, and I can't remember the name of the podcaster, but he said to him, "Oh, actually, I'm sober. I'm in recovery now." And Trump said, "Oh, and how's that going?" for you?"
Yeah.
And I realised that I'd only ever seen him ask another person about themselves
Yeah.
once.
No, that's why actually, if you listen to the whole Rogan thing, he does much more of that than you'd expect.
Yeah.
He's very good at sitting back and saying, "Oh, tell me about this. I didn't know this about boxing.
yeah.
You know what happened? What happened to the lightweight, etc." Yeah. No, no.
Right, well, listen, we're going to have a quick break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by our first guest of the evening. And I'm very, very pleased to say I'm going to declare an interesting, very close personal friend of mine, going back a long way, the former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband. See you in a minute. Welcome back to this live stream Restist Politics special from New York. Looking very beautiful as well, isn't it? All these helicopters pinging around. We've got our first guest of the evening, David Miliband, who runs a huge charity based here in the US, delivering relief and rescue to all sorts of poor people around the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But best known in the UK as being, well, former Foreign Secretary, but also for a lot of people, the Labour leader that we never had. But we don't need to get into that either. We'll talk about the election.
David.
Hello, Rory.
Hello, good to see you. We are obviously, in Britain, very, very worried about what a Donald Trump presidency could mean, but obviously we're also worried that we may be over-exaggerating when we fantasize about the whole world falling to pieces. How would you articulate what it really means for Russia, Ukraine, or China, Taiwan, or the global order?
So the world is on fire, you're right about that, and that's what I deal with most days. I think this is an incredibly consequential election. I'd say there are two parts of the answer. One is China, which you mentioned. I think there is a massive underestimation in the UK and across Europe at how significant the shift is on China policy in the US. You spend time here, I know, but the degree to which the center of gravity has moved towards seeing China as the threat of the 21st century, not just to American interests, but to global order, cannot be overstated. And I don't think that in Europe we've woken up to quite what a change it's going to be, whether it's Harris or whether it's Trump. And interestingly enough, I think, what's really shifted things is what the Chinese are doing in Ukraine. It's the support for the Russians in Ukraine that has, over the last 9 to 12 months, I think that has really consolidated view. I was in DC last week. People in the administration are scratching their heads. Why aren't the Europeans more conscious, more aware, more understanding of quite what a significant strategic move the Chinese have made, because they don't do these things by accident. So that's the first part of it. Ironically, it's an area where there's agreement, more or less, or a lot of overlap between the two parties. Now, in other areas, there's a dramatic difference. And it's true that there are different branches of the Trump machine. There are those who want to emphasize isolationism. They call themselves, they're called the restrainers. There are those who want to prioritize China, and so they want international engagement, but just on the China issue. And then there is a residue of primacists who want to keep American primacy and want to sustain the current system. But notwithstanding that, what the president and the vice presidential nominee have said about Ukraine is very, very significant, that they don't want to continue with current policy. So I think it's very important to see that the stakes are very significant here.
And if you were being gloomy, what's the worst case scenario for what Trump could mean for the next 4 years of international politics?
Well, I think that America is 25% of global GDP, but its political throw weight is declining around the world. Its ability to get both its rivals to do what it wants and its friends to do what it wants is declining. And if America goes into isolationist mode, if the isolationist camp with the so-called restrainer camp within the Trump orbit takes strength, then the institutions that have been foundational to peace, and I would argue prosperity as well, or that peace that has existed since the Second World War, are under very severe threat. For Britain, it's not about President Trump pulling out of NATO. All you have to do is tip the wink that actually NATO is not going to run to the defense of all of its members. That's a very significant change. I think that the trade, the geoeconomics of a new administration that imposes 20% tariffs on all goods entering the country and 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, that's not the end of the story. There's then multiple ripple effects of that. So I think it's right there's so much attention on this election.
But all these tech bros who are particularly leaning for him on half their AI advances, all their success depends on partnership with China. So how are they going to accept that? You know, they need to be a chip superpower. They need to be all these things. So how are they going to?
Well, I think the irony
they're going to lean on him pretty heavily.
Well, but the irony is much less about the relations with China and more about their relations with the US government. I mean, that's where the real drama is. And it's important to remember, President Biden oversaw the passage of 3 of the largest ever pieces of legislation that in respect of, it was called the CHIPS Act, but in respect of semiconductors, and this Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, remember, for all the toings and froings about Labour having a £28 billion spending commitment, the advertised level of the Inflation Reduction Act was $365 billion over 10 years. The actual amount of public subsidy is close to $1 trillion over 10 years. And the great big sucking sound you can hear is of business coming to the US. As Europe stepped up, it obviously puts Britain in a difficult position. So as regards the tech industry, I mean, it is extraordinary that 6 of the top 10 companies in the world are the US tech sector. They've done it, though, a lot with relations with the government. And that's where people are worried that you've got not just a donor class, but an oligarch class.
Yeah.
There's a sort of given that Vladimir Putin would hope that Trump will win. There's a given that Netanyahu in Israel probably wants Trump to win. Where do you think the Chinese are on the sort of the two Americas that might emerge?
I think that they have, first of all, have a high degree of contempt for the way our system works. And so their first reflection is going to be, you call yourselves a democracy, but what a disorderly democracy. You all hate each other. You're balkanized, not just polarized. So I think, and a lot of the worry here about the disinformation is that it's intended to balkanize, to make different communities think that their way of life is threatened by others. Now, I've heard, I mean, I haven't been to China now since before the pandemic, so I was meant to go last October, and I couldn't go because of Gaza and what we were doing there. But what you hear is that the order that President Biden brought to the foreign policy making process was something that, although it was, in some ways, his measures were tougher, they were at least predicted and predictable.
Yeah.
And my own personal view is that the Chinese are not a power that wants to take the risk of bringing down the global system. And so in that context, they want predictability. And I think that's obviously what's under question.
Gaza, you mentioned Gaza. This may be an election which could be determined by Gaza. 450,000 Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, huge number of Arab voters in Michigan. How do you think these different candidates are going to work on Gaza? And do you agree that this could be an election determined in that way by foreign policy?
Well, in an election where, what were the 3 states that were determined by 44,000 votes last time, 10,000, 12,000 votes? I mean, just if we've got the time, pause for a minute to say, there's real democracy happening here amidst all the undermining of democracy. I mean, there is real door by door. I read just on my way in North Carolina, there are 40,000 volunteers a day out for the Democratic ground game. So there's real democracy, and any small group of voters, if they happen to be in the right place, not if they're in New York or California, there's no ads in California, someone said to me today. Any group of voters could move things, and there are voters who are moving on Gaza. There are voters who are moving. Actually, people say foreign policy doesn't matter. Actually, President Trump's argument that he was strong and there weren't any wars.
There were no wars, yeah. That has been a big part of his campaign, no doubt about it.
That's what was your question? I've forgotten what the question was, sorry.
So I think two things. What are these candidates' positions on Gaza? And are we going to see any change if one of the two of them gets elected? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is, let's see what happens between now and the 20th of January, because the politics are different after the votes have been cast than they are before the votes have been cast. It wasn't an accident that a letter was written by the defense and foreign secretaries of the US on the 11th of October saying that Israel needed to let more aid into Gaza. I was on the phone to our teams in Gaza and Lebanon today. It's impossible to overstate how dire is the humanitarian
so that letter didn't work?
Situation. Well, it hasn't worked yet. The point is the 5th of November to the 11th of November is an important period, and the 5th of November to the 20th of January is an important period. Secondly, I think that the preeminent effort of the Biden administration is to prevent a regional war. We've now got a regional war on many fronts, as you've discussed. So it's a different exam question that's being put. There may be some continuity of the personnel from a Biden administration to a Harris administration, but I think the fact that they've got the 4-year time span changes the game.
This is, I don't know what it maybe does have something to do with the election, but just a short while ago, Netanyahu has sacked his defense minister, Gallant. I'd love to know what you think about what we might read into that.
I don't know, why did he say?
I don't know. All I know is that he sacked him.
I mean, this has been prefigured.
It's been rumbling along
significantly.
But I mean, I guess my worry is that it just means that it will strengthen the hands of the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotrich, and And it also seems to be extraordinary that he does it on the day when I guess it's a good day to bury bad news.
Well, I think the big lesson of the last year and 1 month is that Middle Eastern politics is made in the Middle East, not in Washington, not in Moscow. The dispositive powers are in the region, not out of the region. That's a big change.
Although the spectacle of Netanyahu's motorcade going down to Mar-a-Lago and Trump saying, and I will end it. I don't know, sometimes you think I can't engage with what he said on a sort of rational level. How is he going to end this conflict on day one? What would it even look like?
He's only promising to end Ukraine on day one.
He's also said he's going to end all conflict in the Middle East. Are we mad to even...
You have to get him on your show to really get the answers.
Are we mad to even engage with the idea of it at all?
Well, but that's populism, isn't it? You say something for the effect of saying it, as opposed... There's no plan to do that, is there?
No. Well, what would be the plan? To get Jared Kushner back on?
But broadly speaking, he's sympathetic to Netanyahu, isn't he? He's supported moving the
He said he wants it done. Look,
he said a few critical things in his time.
Yeah, but hang on to the sense of grievance. I mean, someone said to me, because I was saying the American economy is doing pretty well. And their answer was, look, yes, compared to others, but first of all, people compare it to themselves, not to others. Secondly, and I thought this was very on point, people think inflation is the government's responsibility. They think their own wage rises are their responsibility. And so the aggregate figures, I think, shouldn't blind us to the fact that 9% inflation 2 years ago, you've talked about it on your show, lots of governments around the world are in trouble. They're running up the downward escalator on the Harris team. That's why lots of people in the UK say, well, how is it possible that it's close? It's close because incumbents are having a terrible time in sustaining support. Well,
David, it's been great to have you. I know that you're a regular listener to our podcast, so you know how much we value the sponsorship of NordVPN. Do you like the way I did that?
That was very impressive.
Thank you.
You also told me on Sunday that you'd had a massive round of applause at your sold-out 15,000 person O2
it was for the
event.
question.
For the question that mentioned the
NordVPN.
NordVPN.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, thanks for coming.
Well, and thank you to David, but also thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring tonight's live stream. Having a VPN is really, really useful while you're online. For us, on a trip like this one, we've got it on all our devices, on our phones, on our laptops. It's blocking malicious websites. It's stopping us getting tracked across the internet. So do please, if you're listening to this show, try out NordVPN for yourself at nordvpn.com/restispolitics for the best discount available.
Now you're back.
Thanks for that. So, what do you make of? Where have you gone?
I was hoping for my tea. I was hoping they were going to bring me my tea.
What do you make of David?
I think he was terrific. I also thought he was a little bit evasive on the subject of Gaza.
Yeah, but listen, he's running a huge charity, which depends on very large sums of money coming from different governments.
Coming from different governments, different people. Yeah, he's got to be a bit careful. We suddenly found that when we had Bill Gates on the show, we were trying to get him to condemn Trump. He was a bit reluctant to do that. He gave quite a lot of money to Kamala Harris's campaign.
50 million?
This presumably is a problem, though, for all these people running big charities and businesses. If you're a senior person, you've got to be pretty careful coming out too strongly in one direction or another.
So therefore, it's definitionally disqualifying. So you're being told by one of the two presidential candidates that your exercise of free speech and your potential denunciation of them could be met with hardship. You have to think about how disqualifying that is. Prima facie, that should be disqualifying.
I've got to say, people won't be able to see this. There's the most beautiful sunset happening just over the Statue
Is there a halo? Because my wife thinks that there's often a halo over the top of my head.
Over my head? I don't know.
No, it's over my head, not your head.
You're looking good. But the Statue of Liberty looks extraordinary.
We're looking great, Anthony.
We are.
Dominic, I want to do a bit of history. And I've already paid you one compliment about you. The success of your...
It's so... I mean, this is what you're known for.
The success of Tom Holland's podcast.
This is what you're known for back in England, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. My niceness to people. But you've also got this amazing series going on at the moment about 1968.
We have indeed, yeah.
So and just tell us why you think that's kind of worth thinking about in the context of what's happening now.
So I think there's a couple of things. So we've done a 6-part series, The Fall of Lyndon Johnson. So a sitting president being unseated by his own party. Yep. In that case, it was over Vietnam, rather than being 143. But again, a sense of massive flux, uncertainty in the campaign, kind of narrative uncertainty, which you don't often get in election campaigns. It's a year of 2 assassinations, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And of course, we've had the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump. But I think 1968 is also a moment of enormous polarization. It's a year of urban riots, riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, a sense of America fraying, of a consensus fraying, and a massive political shift, which ultimately ends up with the South, hitherto solidly Democratic, ends up becoming solidly Republican. So the rise of the Sun Belt. And from 1968, you can trace a lot of the patterns, the rhetorical patterns, the kind of ideological patterns, but also the kind of structural forces that make up American politics today.
Do you think we're living now with consequences that flow directly from this?
Absolutely. And there's one other person actually I should have mentioned. We did an episode about a guy called Governor George Wallace of Alabama, segregationist, independent candidate, the most consequential independent candidate, I would argue, in American history. And if we dug deep into his rhetoric and his themes, he would do these set-piece rallies where he would stand up and he would effectively do a stand-up act. And it would be an enemies list, it would be rambling, it would often be quite darkly funny. And actually, you go through his rhetoric, and it's uncanny, the similarities between Wallace, what he's saying, his targets, the people he's appealing to, and the people that Trump.
Of course, there was an assassination attempt in, I guess, 72. He was wounded.
Right. In Florida. No, Maryland, I think it was.
Yeah, he was assassinated in Maryland. He was running again for president, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. And he lived to apologize for his actions in the 1960s and for his high-level racism and his high-level.
He became born again. He became born again.
Became born again. But your podcast series was phenomenal. I learned a lot from it. Not just saying that because we're podcast family members. The thing that I hope could you address just for a few seconds is McCarthy.
Oh,
Eugene McCarthy. Okay. Because we don't have anybody in the field that is anything like Eugene McCarthy.
Okay, so he's the guy who unseated Johnson. He challenged Johnson over the issue of Vietnam. I have a little bit of history with Eugene McCarthy because, as we were saying off screen, Anthony, when we were kicked off for David Miliband.
You weren't kicked off.
Well,
it was almost like the James Bond ejection seat.
Yeah, Anthony was seething.
I felt like I was in Goldfinger on my way out the door.
Anthony wanted to take his 7 mobile phones to go and do a bit of business. You wanted to go and see Patricia the makeup lady to talk about Kevin Costner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so very knowledgeable in politics, not knowledgeable in the markets. The markets are closed.
So Alastair. For listeners, give us the response. So Eugene McCarthy, for someone like me, is seen as an incredibly dignified, honourable, wonderful example of the kind of integrity in politics that I want. Eugene McCarthy's my pin-up right now. What's your history?
This is terrible. This is terrible, because my PhD was on Eugene McCarthy, and when I wrote
my pin-up is you, Rory. I just want you to know that.
He said he'd only met 3 shits in his life, if I'm allowed to say that on the rest is politics.
Well, you said it in the series.
And they were Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and me. So that tells you, I thought I was pretty pumped to be in that company.
But what was his analysis?
Were you wearing the waistcoat at the time he said it, or next ask him? Possibly.
He just didn't like. I said, he's a very prickly man. I mean, it's not that I said it; it's that all these people said it. The interviews that I did, it was about the failure of his political career, what went wrong, his rift with the Kennedys, his feud with people in the Democratic Party. The fact that his campaign had been taking money from his rival Hubert Humphrey's campaign.
But he's an example of something that we often crave in politics. He was capable of incredible articulate oratory. He could be very intellectual. He was very well read. He was a wonderful kind of example of the kind of statesman we're looking for, who somehow occasionally appeared to lack the killer instinct and the...
Maybe. But all the things you're describing, by the way, are true of a lot of people in that campaign. So when we did the series, we read out bits of the speeches of, Robert Kennedy, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, who's commonly thought of as a great kind of villain of American history. These are people who I think are in a higher class than a lot of today's politicians. I mean, these are cerebral, well-read, thoughtful, reflective people. People with problems, of course, Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, we know they had massive problems. But it's a terrible cliche to say, politics is getting worse, politicians are getting worse. But I think the context has changed, and I think the context in 1968, or in the 60s generally, gave them much more time to think, to reflect, to be more rounded and seasoned and interesting individuals. And McCarthy is one of many who were like that.
But Marina, we were talking about this earlier today. It's like all of those politicians that you talked about, including people like Nixon, who ended up going for what we all know he went for. Trump gets away with way more than any of them did.
Yeah, it's nothing like the great sadness is that Trump and the way they talk and the way they act now. These are things that the way I remember when I was growing up, I thought you couldn't have capitalism without democracy. I was saying this to you last night, but you look at China and you see that you can. I didn't think that the kinds of lies, these grand lies that we've seen told by the Trump campaign and the Trump proxies and all those sort of things could exist in a democracy, because I sort of vaguely felt, I thought it could happen in Putin's Russia, it could happen wherever, but you've seen that it can. And I don't think that we have that shared reality anymore. There is not a shared reality. And I have to say that, this is such a pessimistic note to sound, but even if there's a Harris victory, you just sort of feel that these people who are reality deniers, they can stay awful longer than you can stay victorious, and they are in every level. They're in the courts, they're in all the media. They're in the media. They are everywhere, and you can't. Even if she wins, how can you reset? There is not a cultural kind of common culture to reset to. It has become so polarized that I think it's really hard to see a way back.
But I guess a lot of this depends on the extent to which, and I'd be interested in your view on this, Anthony, the extent to which the change that we all recognise and that Rory and I talk about all the time on the podcast, and you do with Catty Kay, that Trump has brought to America and American politics, is how much that depends on him, the personality, and how much it's about deeper trends that will continue long after he's gone.
Well, he's a Frankenstein monster, and he's got little Frankenstein babies that are going to try to take over for him, but I don't think they'll be successful. What that party needs is a Barack Obama-like figure that's articulate and charismatic and has good policies. But where would
the politics come from?
But this. What do you mean by the politics?
Well, where does the politics come? We're talking about what might follow Trump in the Republican Party. Is it possible for somebody to follow and build on what he's done?
Yes, I see. What I said to Vivek Ramaswamy this morning, I debated him on CNBC. I said, there's a beautiful, colorful mosaic of the American people. You guys aren't approaching them. You guys have separated from them. There has to be a younger leader, and maybe it'll be you, you're 40 years old, that has to reflect this mosaic and has to impart to this group of people the right policies. They can be center-right policies, but they can't be this dehumanizing that Donald Trump is doing. And Marina, I believe we can get there, and I will tell you something. There is nothing like the tonic of disposable income for my fellow Americans to drop the hatred. And so if we can reconnect,
Do you really think that?
If everyone can get richer, then women get their reproductive rights back.
The richer people are the ones who spread the hate the most.
It's the desperation, aspiration, disequilibrium. The people I grew up with, they feel economically desperational today. When I was growing up with my father as an hourly worker, we felt economically aspirational. There's 20 to 25% of the country that wants the system smashed to smithereens. They see Trump as an orange wrecking ball, destroy the system for us, go after the media, go after the establishment, go after the pharmaceutical companies, whatever you can do. The system's not working for me, so I'm a nihilist now. I used to be an American, and I used to be an American dreamer, but now I'm a nihilist. Blow the system up. And what that party needs is somebody to say, wait, we don't want to blow the system up. We want to fix the system and bring you back into the system.
Don't you think, though, going back to what Marina was saying, though, I completely agree with Marina that there's a lack of a common... the world in which there were three big networks, and everybody watched those networks, a world in which there were kind of cultural gatekeepers who controlled the conversation, people were in a shared space, that has disappeared, culture is fragmented, and the culture, particularly with the mediums that we have, the media...
Can I challenge him a little?
They drive... the algorithm rewards stridency, strong views, polarization,
and staying
aggression.
Angry, because the angrier you are, the longer you stay on the platform, and that's how they're all optimized for you to become angry and to stay on the platform. And unless we break them up or regulate them or do something with them, then it's not going to kind of get any better. And I can't really see how, the path to women getting their reproductive rights back, you're going to have to explain to me when these people are so organized and they're in every level and they're in long-term positions in the Supreme Court. How's that going to happen?
You're saying you don't think that even if she wins, that necessarily what she's promising...
I don't want it to sound such a negative note, because if she wins, it's great in lots of different ways. But the level of organisation, there are millions of people who think these things. And I appreciate, Anthony, your economic argument, that lots of it is about, like, if I was richer, then I wouldn't mind so much about this stuff. But a lot of it is ideological, and it's not to do with economics.
But it's not necessarily richer. It's the thought that my children are going to be richer. My children are going to have class mobility. But can I just say something to Dominic?
Yes.
Because I am here 60 years now observing this country, obviously love this country. The establishment did damage to the country. They ignored the wishes of the country. There was a protest in 1999. As a young Wall Streeter, I laughed at the protesters, so it doesn't reflect well on me. They went to Seattle, the World Trade Organization meeting, and the World Trade Organization wanted to bring in China, and Bill Clinton supported it. It was 1993. And we on Wall Street said, oh, that's ridiculous. We're David Ricardo's. We're searching for the lowest cost capital allocation, and therefore we should move all these manufacturing centers out of the United States. But Ralph Nader was right. He was right. We got it wrong. Okay, 25 years ago, they begged them not to do it. 25 years ago, 65,000 factories have moved out of the United States since those decisions were made. And we got to wake these politicians up and say, hey, all for capitalism, but you better help these people. You better help these people rise. You may hate Henry Ford, but he did that.
So just stepping back for a second. So you're pointing to polarization, social media. He's pointing to China joining the World Trade Organization. We could talk about the 2008 financial crisis. But whatever the causes of this are, we're looking at something really, really disturbing. I mean, if I'm wrong, right, and Donald Trump wins this election rather than Kamala Harris, it feels to me like a much, much more shattering blow than it was the first time round in 2016. And the guy spent 4 years in office. He has been convicted now of felony. We know far more about him than we did before.
Immunity.
If he's re-elected now, he's re-elected at a very different moment. It's a moment where, as Alastair and I keep pointing out, the AfD is now stronger in Germany. Kickl in Austria has just taken the most votes.
Le Pen on the march.
Le Pen is on the march. Netherlands changing. I mean, now suddenly Orban's fantasies of a world of strong men have shift away from all the fantasies of liberal democracy in the 1990s, feels much more. And I suppose what I'm trying to get to is, we can be academic about the causes, whether it's social media or whether it's real economics. But the fact of the thing will be just kind of shatteringly disturbing.
And the people around him this time are so much more organised. They have a plan. They have some things they want to do, and we know a lot about them.
It's also the thing I find absolutely incredible. In fact, David Miliband, who was where the Mooch is sitting a few minutes ago, he talks a lot about this being the era of impunity.
Yeah.
That people can do terrible things and get away with it, be that in politics, in business, and whatever. I think in America, for an American president to be elected whilst... You were talking on the podcast the other day about, was he breaking his bail conditions by some of the things he's been doing? Because this guy's convicted, he's going to be sentenced in due course. And all of the bad things that he's done and criminal things that he's done, and yet here we are talking about, we talk about crime without punishment, becoming president after you've committed all these crimes.
We're talking an evening where most people think that it's 50-50, that there's a pretty 100%. Good chance this guy could be president.
I mean, even that the insurrection, the January 6th.
Exactly.
The January 6th thing is the thing that I find remarkable.
Utterly disqualified.
But everything is good for him. He's created this political weather, that he's reversed the laws of political physics. So
sure.
These things happen, and he gets convicted, and people are like, this will be great for him. Yeah. This will play well for him. Yeah. And everything up is down.
Anthony, how on earth could January the 6th happen, his role in it be played out in plain sight, and that is not a disqualifying event for a presidential candidate? How can that be?
There's a short answer to that. Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy.
Okay, so political cowards.
Because this is the only democracy where they were so fragile and they were so weak that profiles in cowardice, where they were jellyfish to Donald Trump. Pelosi had him on the ropes. All McCarthy had to do, and he hates Trump. He may end up as the chief of staff, by the way, but he absolutely hates Trump. He could have called up 10% of his caucus and said, we're voting for this, and McConnell's going to back me in the Senate. We're going to convict him. He's going to get knocked out. McCarthy would probably be running for president. He'd be the strongest person in the Republican Party. If he said, you know what, we've had enough of you. This was my house. I was about to be the Speaker of the House. You sent a mob to ransack my house. We've had enough of you.
So that's the short answer.
Yeah.
And the longer answer?
And the longer answer is that Donald Trump has captured the imagination of 25% of his fellow Americans that feel left out. And as a result of which he can do anything because he wants, those people want you and me and Marina, Dominic and Rory to feel bad. They want to own us, okay? Own the libs. I'm not a lib, but that's what they want to do.
But isn't that expressing something deeper, which is there has always been, or there's been certainly for a very long time, a deep-seated vein of anti-Washington sentiment. And an attack on Washington, an attack on the political establishment.
Perfect.
But he had 4 years to drain the swamp.
Yeah, but the swamp, by definition, can't be drained.
It's not a swamp. Okay, let me give you a news
I
flash.
know that.
It's
I
a
know that.
gold-plated hot tub. It's not a swamp.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
but-
sit in the gold-plated hot tub. They smoke cigars and they drink Dom Perignon.
I really struggle with what has happened. I mean, look, you take the UK, okay? Boris Johnson, who Rory and I both kind of despise for the damage he's done to the country, but the country and our political system found him out and he's gone. And he can go around the world doing what he does. He's never coming back. He's been spat out, he's gone. Trump did way worse.
Who spat him out?
The system did. Our politics did. Okay. Your politics, for some reason, has kept this guy in.
They were afraid of him.
But how can you be so afraid of somebody who sort of does all the stuff he does in plain sight?
I grew up in a neighborhood. I stand up to the guy every day. You got to tell me. I don't understand these guys. What are they would put their personal ambition and their self-aggrandizement over the public service.
They're only afraid of him because they think he's powerful.
Yeah.
Isn't it? They're afraid of his audience.
Of course.
And that's the fascinating thing. Why does he still... The audience would not give up on him.
And the audience thing is very interesting.
They will if he loses tonight because he's got nowhere to go.
Because one of the problems that we're all facing analysing is we're so revolted by January the 6th and many other things that we find it difficult to, well, it's something you often talk about, difficult to understand why people support him. And you're going to hate this analogy because you hate this analogy because people do it all the time. But that point that you were making about dark humour and comedy, I feel when you look, he's a completely different man. Obviously, he's not Hitler, but Hitler's speeches in the beer gardens in Munich have much more satire, humour, and cunning to them than people acknowledge. And often, you know, when people like Kershaw are writing histories of Hitler, they hate the man so much, they want to make him out as being humorless, lacking in charisma, lacking in appeal. Obviously, he wasn't. Obviously, there was some sort of trick there that made this guy appealing. And part of it is their use of satire, the way they mock the establishment.
Okay, well, on Hitler, that's the first mention of Hitler tonight. We've had Victoria Beckham, we've had Hitler, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back in a couple of minutes, and we're going to talk about. We're going to get a sense from our various people that we all talk to of how the campaigns are feeling. Back in a minute.
It's good stuff.
Welcome back to the Rest is Politics live stream from the World Trade Center in New York in the Spotify building. I want to get into how the campaigns are feeling. God, that sunset is amazing. Just look at that.
It's very beautiful, but I don't think everyone can see it.
No, I know, but I can.
Okay.
I'm speaking.
It's good. No, but I mean the viewers can't see it.
They can see it behind Alastair's head, I think. It would look
Exactly. Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't
There's
it?
a glow.
It's nice. It's
Yeah.
nice.
There's a glow.
They can see it reflected off this building, I think.
Rory, you'll be
yeah.
pleased with
Yeah.
this, because I know how ridiculously competitive you are. Apparently we've had 500,000 people tuning in already.
That's amazing. Well, we better up our game, get it up to 1 million.
We should,
It's not enough.
we should try that, yeah.
We've got to be
Can't you
more
get Tom
interesting,
Holland
more
to
funny.
tweet for
Yeah.
us or something like that? Because he's got a big
Yeah,
following.
get some of our rest
He's got a
history
big
listeners,
following.
some of our enormous following.
Him and Stormzy, and we'll be there.
Number 2 in the United States.
Number 2 in the United
Behind
States.
Rogan,
yeah.
we'll get rid of him. Can we start to look at how the campaigns are feeling? I've got to say, Marina and I were talking at breakfast. I was saying that, and Rory will know this from when he was a candidate, in politics, this is the worst day of all. If you've been working in a campaign, you can do absolutely nothing. You're totally dependent upon people going out there, voting as they vote, and you feel utterly
Can you not make
powerless.
some really irate phone calls, Alastair, as I believe you
You
at times
can.
were forced
You
to
can do that, but you can't sort of campaign in the normal way.
I remember when I was standing the first time, I got in touch with my friend Matthew Parris, who'd been a Member of Parliament, and I said, "What's your advice on the day?" And he said, "Walk up into the hills and pray that this cup
Yeah.
is taken from you." That's all. That's all.
Oh
we
my
could do.
gosh.
No, it is. You feel utterly helpless. And you just imagine what it's like for Kamala Harris today, what she's thinking and feeling and going through. It's incredible. And you've got no power.
And
powerless.
that's right. And you relying on people like Alastair saying to you, "You've done all you can. You've just got to hope that it's going to come through."
So can I give some insight, because I think you'll enjoy
Absolutely,
this. It's November the 8th, it's 2016, it's 6 p.m. at Trump Tower, and Trump's in his office, and I knock on the door. How
And
you
this
doing?
is here in New York, right?
This is 8 years ago, right?
But Trump Tower in New York.
Trump Tower in New York, yeah.
Yeah,
We did our event at the Hilton. Knock, knock. Hey, how you doing? Good. Anthony, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, what do you mean, Mr. Trump? What am I doing tomorrow? He said, well, I want to know what you're doing tomorrow. I know what I'm doing. I said, well, what are you doing? I'm moving my plane from LaGuardia Airport to JFK. Why? You can't fly internationally from LaGuardia. And he was heading to Scotland to play on his new golf course. And he said to me, let her have her day in the sun. You know how he does that with the thing? And I looked at him and I said, oh, okay, I guess I'll be back to work.
So he thought he lost?
Thought he lost. 6 p.m. on November the 8th, Bannon, Trump, Kushner, there wasn't a person in that room that thought he won. They sent me into the Lions Den. They sent me to the New York Times in the Times Square to speak to 300 liberals that were very confident that Hillary had won. And I said, look, we're going to run through the tape. Let's see what happens. By 2 a.m., we were writing his acceptance speech. She couldn't make a concession speech that night. She was so shocked at what happened to her. She sent Podesta out to say she's conceded, but she's going to talk tomorrow.
I'm so shocked by his good grace. It's like that's the last nice thing he said.
Wait a minute. So he wasn't going to say this is rigged. He was just going to accept it.
No. He was going to definitely say that it was rigged, and he was definitely going to say all those things, but he didn't want to be present for the media firestorm. And he felt that he lost the election. It was rigged, but why stay around? You know what I mean? He was heading
Because all
away.
the polls were showing that he had lost. That's everything that he was seeing in the polls
So
suggested
the New
he'd
York
lost,
Times did away with this, Rory, but they had a meter.
Yeah,
And it
Yeah.
was Trump
I
was at
remember the meter going.
100%.
Yeah.
And we were watching the meter.
I was with my wife watching that meeting.
Can I tell you the second that I knew he won? I can remember like it was yesterday. Want to hear the second I knew he won?
Yeah.
It was 10:31 p.m. I was sitting on a couch with Rudolph Giuliani. And Giuliani looked at a flat screen TV and he said, you see that, Anthony? Those precincts in Florida, those are white collar precincts. They report late because people are coming home and then they go to vote. Blue collar people vote in the morning. They're voting for Trump. He's going to win Florida. And as Rudy was saying that, the meter from the New York Times was going like this. And then we knew he won. And then the whole shock and awe thing started related to that.
That's fascinating. Let's bring it up to today. What's the sense that people have inside the campaigns? I sort of feel that this week there's been a lot of what I call traditional bedwetting going on. That
Who's wetting the bed, Al?
I think, not in the last 2 or 3 days, but I think a few days before that, I think the Democrats were.
Yeah, but now...
I think now they
Trump,
feel okay. I think now Trump is.
Have you ever seen so much walking back in the entire campaign as you've seen this 1 week where they've done clean-up all the time? They've had to clean up after Madison Square Gardens. They've cleaned up after, him falling into the garbage truck. They're constantly saying, no, he didn't mean that. Or it was wrong, this has been said wrong.
He doesn't want to kill Liz
And
Cheney.
then you see these things and you see his next rally and there's suddenly like, it's like women for Trump, the people who are picked to be the backdrop. There's that sense that and more and more about it's going to be stolen, it's going to be rigged. It's like they're getting their excuses in early. And maybe that's just a hedge and it's fine, but I get the feeling that...
let me just say, do you know one of the reasons I love Kamala Harris? Every time I see her, like there, she's on the phone, she's talking to voters today. We need that smile in the world. We need that positivity in our politics.
So my friend Percy's out campaigning for her in Michigan at the moment.
Okay.
So I just talked to him on the phone. And he's been doing Pennsylvania today, he was in Michigan yesterday. He is absolutely loving it. And there is this enormous Democrat. He's an American who's currently living in Britain but has come back to the States to campaign. There is such a huge ground game. It is so exciting as a young Democrat who's out on the streets. And he is finding a lot of the sort of things that we would hope that he's finding. He's finding many women saying, my husband's voting for Trump, but I'm going to be voting for Kamala Harris. Tell us a little bit about your experience to us. Yeah.
Well, listen, I arrived to an incredibly well-organized situation. It was the Black Democratic Caucus in Montgomery County. It's maybe 20 miles outside of the city of Philadelphia, and we worked our way back to Philadelphia. And they had me in an area, and they said, okay, knock on these doors. And they had the names of the people and the ages and stuff like that. I said, go knock on the doors. And there were Trump signs in the area, and there were Harris signs. And they didn't want me to knock on any of the Trump doors.
Signs, yeah.
But I think you guys are getting to know me, and I have pictures of it. I went up to the Trump doors, and they opened up the door. Why not? Because they didn't want me to be deflated. They wanted me to report back to the campaign that,
but you're exactly the guy who should be knocking on those doors.
Well, that's what I did. So I was knocking on those doors, and I had great fun with these women that I was with. I was unsuccessful in turning Trump voters. I'm not saying I turned one Trump voter. But the notion that I was there, one guy looked at me and goes, Mooch, what the hell are you doing at my door on a Sunday morning in Montgomery County? I said, I'm here to try to convince you to replace that sign with a Harris Wall sign. He laughed. He said, hey, can I get the phone? I got to take a selfie for my wife. She's not home. She's at church. So we're standing on his front stoop taking selfies. But the campaign loved it. We went back as we were coming back into Philadelphia, probably saw 250 volunteers for her. Then I went to a dinner event. There were several congressmen there, one congresswoman. They gave me the opportunity to speak at that event. And then I went to a lounge where they were hosting young students and African-American males. So it was very well planned, very well thought out.
Just give us the figures that you gave us before on how much more money she has and how much more of a ground game she's got going.
Okay, so she's 3-1 on the money. The ground game for him is virtually non-existent. He claims he has 50,000 volunteers. So knowing Trump, that's got to be an exaggerated number. It can't be more than 50. Yeah. Let's just put it that way, right? She has 300,000 volunteers. Okay, there were so many volunteers in Pennsylvania coming from out of state,
like my friend Percy.
over the weekend, that the campaign said, okay, we don't have a lot for you to do because we've only got so many doors and so many places to knock.
There were 6 buses today leaving here.
Yeah.
To go to Pennsylvania.
No question.
Do you think he...
806,000 doors knocked on yesterday by the Harris.
Do you think she's regretting not picking the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, as her vice president?
So this is a brilliant question. You asked me that in the hallway. And I'm going to say no to this question. And eventually I'm going to get canceled. It could be tonight even. But
You've been canceled before.
I've been canceled before. Hopefully I can survive it. And Dominic, I'm just going to be very clear to people. When she did the analytics, he is great. He's persuasive. He's moderate. He's strong on Israel. Lots of things that were liked about him. I don't think she could stomach the idea that she's an African-American woman, first woman to potentially be president, half Indian, tagged up with a Jewish governor. And if people are mad at me for that, or I'm going to get condemned for that, I really think that went into the equation because there is a lot of racism in this country and there is a lot of misogyny in this country. And so she went with Waltz. And I'm going to reference 68 for a second. She did not want a ultra-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protest, 1968 style in Chicago on the night of her nomination. And she knew by picking Waltz, she would liquidate that from happening. And I think it was a brilliant pick for her. He hasn't heard her. I'm not saying he's been scintillating, but I did put out a tweet after Vance got picked by Trump. I said, I just want to thank J.D. Vance for replacing me as the worst hire in the Trump universe. Like, I just
is that
make sure that,
is this significant? Co-founder of Uncommitted Movement says he voted for Harris. Is that, I don't know what that means even. No.
Don't know. I don't know. But
Okay.
Yeah, Vance is
any
like,
vote for Harris I like.
But Vance has now been in that place. It seems it's like he's in witness protection.
He's in a sort of limbo.
But it's kind of like he's gone to that place where they used to send Jacob Rees-Mogg in British election campaigns, like nailed into a coffin or put into a priest hole, like don't talk. Every time he opens his mouth, it's got worse, and he is a nothing. You know, Musk has been the de facto running mate.
When was the last time that you saw Vance and Trump together?
Oh, no, forget it. Trump is super mad at him, by the way.
Yeah.
Because?
Super mad at him.
Because?
Well, how could you go on Rogan after I went on Rogan? Number two, how could you give an interview that's better interview than the ones that I'm giving? Number three, are you trying to out-Trump me with your speeches? Trump is the most insecure human being that you will ever meet in your life. Okay, you have to understand that. There was one cabinet member that said to me, I can't use his name, but Marina, he said to me, you know, Trump came over to me and says, oh, you know, you're getting more famous than me now. I go, okay, that was bad. And then Trump said to me, you know, are you President so-and-so, using the guy's last name? And then he looked over at me and said, you know what? It was at that moment that I booked a trip to Argentina. I said, we're taking 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of here. I got to get out of Trump's ray gun. And Vance is in his ray gun. He's going to be neutralized. He won't have the future he thinks. And he could have had a good future because he's a smart guy.
He might be in Gitmo with you as well. You could all be, you and the comedian and Vance. You could.
Great.
I don't see Vance going to Gitmo. He's too close to Don Jr., but you're going to visit me down there, I hope?
Oh, 100%.
They got
Dominic,
good French fries.
You don't get any visiting
in Gitmo?
No.
There's no visiting.
No, you don't.
All right, never mind.
We've talked on the podcast about there was lots of discussion about Waltz, about Vance. Through time, have the number twos ever made a really big difference? I think
No,
Sarah
not really.
Palin did by being so bad.
They can tank you if they're terrible.
Yeah.
Eagleton.
But Eagleton had to drop out because he'd had electroshock therapy, so that was George McGovern's pick in 72, but didn't change the result. McGovern was going to lose that anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
I think a brilliant pick
Dan
was
Quayle?
Clinton. Quayle didn't hurt Bush.
They won.
Bush won.
They won.
Clinton picked Gore, which played to Clinton's own strength, reminded people of Clinton's own strengths, a moderate Southern Democrat.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do, you just don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. That's what McGovern did with Eagleton. I mean, Dan Quayle was not a great pick, I would say, deep down. But I don't think it
Palin was incredible.
Worst pick
I mean,
ever, Andrew Johnson.
Well, he was
The worst pick ever.
Shocking president.
And what do we think? What do we think of Vance? How seriously do we take the idea that he's there as a sort of puppet for the Musks and the Teals and these guys?
I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I would rank that at 150. You have to take that totally seriously, and you should be Googling at home right now, Curtis Yarvin, Yarvin.
Right, we've now got a second guest, and I'm absolutely delighted about this, to be able to welcome none other. I think we should sit up straight, Rory. We're both proud British citizens, and Her Excellency, the Ambassador for the United Kingdom to the United States, there with her two flags. Karen Pierce, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for being here. Now, either your sound's not working, Karen, or ours isn't. We couldn't hear you there. Give it one more go. Well, should we come back? Should we sort that out and come back to
She
you?
might be on mute.
You stay there and we'll come back
We'll
to you.
come back to you in 1
Yeah.
minute. We'll
So-
with this, yeah.
Dominic, one of the things we want to talk about, Karen, is and I want your view on this as well, Anthony. We talk about bedwetting. There's a lot of bedwetting goes on about
Yeah.
the so-called special relationship.
Oh, that's a big topic.
Now, I know it's
Yeah.
a big topic, but give us a brief kind of summary of the history of that and whether truly deep down it still exists.
So the foundational moment of it, obviously, lots of people will know, is Second World War, the Churchill-Roosevelt relationship. But ever since then it has been lopsided. I think it's mattered far more to people in Britain. I mean, you will know about this from your trips with Tony Blair.
Yep.
It's mattered, I think, far more to people in Britain than people in the US. Now, I think maybe you think I'm being harsh, that probably as soon as your flight took off to come back to London, that they kind of forgot about you and they turned on something else.
I didn't.
And I don't think that's how it works the other way around. I think we think about them.
We think about them a lot.
Far
No
more
doubt
than
about
they
that. No
think
doubt
about
about that.
Well, I also discovered that they have so many special relationships. I remember
Ireland, Israel.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
They-
Ireland's
Canada,
never going to
they-
fade. That's
yeah.
never going to fade. Yeah.
No, and they can even suggest France has a special relationship because
Their
that's
oldest
connected to
ally.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. And they use the phrase special relationship for all those.
Anthony, do you think where do we figure?
I think
where
you
do we
guys
figure?
hit yourselves a little bit too much if I'm just being totally
Yeah.
candid. It's the number one relationship. There's no even number 2 or 3. It's not even close. And I think the Americans, whether you guys believe it or not, they have a great respect for the ancestral tie to Great Britain. I will say this, though. When I got fired from the White House, I requested to go out the East End because they have this thing called Pebble Beach. And I didn't want to be in front of the press with my head down as I was walking out unceremoniously fired. So I said, could I go out the East End? And so the Secret Service guy said yes. And then he said, Mooch, I want to take you to see something. And he took me into the basement of the White House. And you could see the charring,
The burn marks.
the burn marks from the War of 1812. So we were a little pissed at you back then when you set fire to the White House. Okay?
Yeah.
But since then, it's
We're not
been
going to do it again.
It's a very fine military operation.
It's an excellent operation.
yeah,
I talked about it on
yeah,
stage
yeah,
in Washington,
yeah.
D.C.,
Yeah,
would you believe?
yeah.
Never. Have you ever been hissed by an audience of like 1,000
the
people?
history. But I think we love the Brits, and I think Brits do very, very well here. And I think, as I've told Gaddy Kay, that her accent's worth probably 25 IQ points here in this side of the pond.
But it's a heritage thing, isn't it? Like, even Trump, like, he really wanted the state visit. But it's because his mum liked the Queen and he wanted to go and see the
Then he
things.
walked
And
in front of her.
Yeah.
But Dominic, I think I want to push back a little bit. I think so I would say, for example, in something like Kosovo, I think they thought about us a lot after we went back. And that's one of the reasons why, in the end, I think they did actually change their policy and their approach. And likewise, I think that the reason why Tony Blair invested so much in his relationship with Clinton and then with Bush is because I think he accepted the Brit has to work harder at it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, once you've done that...
Well, look what they thought about Cameron.
Was it not you who said to Sir Christopher Mayor when he was the ambassador, we want you to get up the arse of the White House and stay there?
No, I didn't say that.
I think that was definitely you.
I think that was...
But it is something you would have said, though, or no?
No, I wouldn't
okay,
have
just
said...
asking.
I wouldn't have been so rude.
But if you see what they said about Cameron in Libya, you can see that people in the State Department were like, the Brits are useless, they're going to flake, they're going to let us down. And, I mean, well, they were right.
Well, and
So it hasn't
Syria,
been...
Syria
yeah,
was the big
Syria,
one. Yeah.
But also, as relative economic power changes, Britain is just much less important than it was.
Exactly.
I mean,
And as
the
America changes
British economy, when Alastair is stepping down from his role, is still bigger than the Chinese economy. Today, the Chinese economy is 7 times larger than the British economy.
And it's that, and I
very
think
quickly.
America itself is changing all the time. It's becoming more Latino, it's becoming more Asian, so it's looking more to the Pacific than it would have been.
I want to say something to Dominic. Your country is Athens, our country is Rome. And the Romans looked up to the Athenians. Don't forget that.
Yeah, but you were also a sort of memento mori of what happens when empires decline and fail because we're further along the road. And
I love the way that the mooch is morphing into Tom Holland.
Yeah.
Well, it's all
Very disturbing.
Big,
good, though,
big.
right?
Would you like to come on the rest of history and replace
Oh my God! I would
replace
just
my
love to
co-host?
be on. Just as a, you just tell me the topic. I'll come well.
I think
versed.
maybe you could replace you and just do
No,
a double
no,
up
I
with
don't
Tom.
want that.
No, that's not
gonna work.
No, I love listening to him.
Yeah.
I should say we're still trying to get. Apparently, it isn't our
never
sound
happen.
that's gone down.
I like it. I'm a
It's
huge
Karen.
fan. I am
Okay.
one of your U.S. listeners. Just so
Let's
you
get
know.
rid of these other guys. and just
Trying
have a
to
chat,
beat
you and
out
me.
Joe Rogan. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So I think we're
You're my boy. You're my boy, Blue.
so
Now-
we're going to go to a Sally Reid. Yeah. You're going to do an ad read for us, I believe, on Sally.
We're doing Sally Reid.
Yeah, is that okay? Is that allowed?
I'm
Is that
so
allowed?
happy
We
with
got-
Sally. I'm a big client of Sally.
While we're trying to get.
Am I doing the Sally Reid right
Yes,
now?
you are,
Yeah,
right
do
now.
Sally Reid
Okay,
right
so
now.
a big shout out to Sally, a phenomenal product. It's a technology that you can download on your phone.
Yeah.
It's an eSIM technology, so you can avoid roaming charges wherever you travel around the world. And with us, if you're in our family, you can get a 15% discount. You got to go to sally.com/tripus. That's sally.com/TRIPUS. And Alastair's right now is very impressed that I was able to look right down the barrel of the camera, me and Sally, Love you, Sally.
I just think the way you managed to memorize Saley.com/tripus, amazing. Well done.
Yeah,
well done.
Thanks.
Listen, we're still trying to get hold of Karen Pierce, the British ambassador, but we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Joe Biden's legacy. See you soon. Welcome back to the Rest is Politics live stream here from New York. The sun has gone down. It's still pretty beautiful out there, though. So I can see why you like living here, Anthony. I want to talk about Joe Biden. Not that long ago, there was the guy, leader of the free world, thought he was going to be the candidate. And then, I guess, Nancy Pelosi. I heard the other day Nancy Pelosi and he were in the same room, and it was very, 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 very chilly. But I mean, we both said on the podcast the day of that debate, it was impossible to imagine that he could carry on. Did you watch the whole debate?
Yes.
And what did you think?
I mean, it was sort of unwatchable, that moment. Everybody, you have your hands over your face, and there was no way back. But he took a while to realise that. History,
Dominic.
Biden.
How will history see Biden?
One-term presidents don't tend to be remembered. I think people aren't going to be doing their kind of high school projects on Joe Biden's presidency in the 23rd century. He'll be eclipsed, I think, in the public mind because he's preceded by two much more exciting, charismatic characters in Obama and Trump. I think he'll be remembered relatively fondly, actually. Safe pair of hands, solid, but not especially exciting, I wouldn't have said. So I don't think he'll be a name to conjure with. 2 centuries' time, if the American Republic still exists, we'll probably be talking about Joe Biden as one of the transformational presidents. I don't think so.
Anthony?
Well, I'm going to be slightly contrarian. I think he's going to be very well regarded in our lifetimes. I think people are going to look back and say he was the guy to beat Trump, and he was the guy to stop the nonsense. And by the way, if Obama had let him run in 2016, there never would have been a Trump. I'm not saying we wouldn't have had the populism.
Now, I hope, and fingers crossed, that Karen Pierce is back with us, and hope that we've got the sound working. Karen, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yes, I can. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. It's fabulous. It's lovely to see you.
Great. You too.
So listen, we've talked lots. We were just talking when you were getting your sound sorted about the much vaunted special relationship. I guess you get sick of being asked about the special relationship, don't you?
One can never talk too much about it, I think. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's quite good shorthand for what is an unprecedentedly deep, successful, profound relationship that has this great bedrock of defence, security and intelligence. And then fundamentally, I think, Alastair, in every nook and cranny of public life, and often in the private sector, you have this embedded, consistent interoperability, whether you're talking about trade and investment, whether you're talking about life sciences, whether you're talking about armies training together. And I do think that is unprecedented in the modern world between two countries. And it helps to have English as a common language. Alexander Hamilton said, we think in English, and we have common law in common. And that does engender a certain sort of liberality in approach, I think.
Ambassador, you're obviously have to be very careful not to take sides in this election, but Give us a sense of what happens when the result comes through. What are the first things that the British Embassy would be doing, regardless of whether it's Harris or Trump who wins, to try to put Britain in the position it would want to be in?
So we've been preparing for several months, Rory. We have consulates around the US who are sending in reports of the local mood, and they'll be sending in further reports throughout the night tomorrow, what the local polls are saying, what the mood is, what the exit polls are saying, what local TV is saying. We have people in the embassy here in both the Republican and the Democratic camps. A lot of us are just fanning out around Washington, testing what people are saying, testing the mood, giving advice to London, which hasn't been dramatic, I have to say. We have been saying the race is too close to call, but we can give them the sense of who is optimistic, who is pessimistic. And then when the results come in, and of course that might not be tomorrow, in 2020, we didn't know till the Saturday after the election, then we go into advice mode and give the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary some recommendations about what they should do, what they should say, who they should call.
Karen, we saw you at the DNC in Chicago, and you had quite a big team there, and you were really kind of, it was fascinating to watch the way that you operated. But then you'd also been doing the same at the Republican National Convention, and then you had this meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump recently. What sort of went into the planning for that? How do you fix something like that at such a politically sensitive time?
I think the key, Alastair, is that we're even-handed and we're scrupulous about that. What we offer to one of the American candidates, we offer to the other. So, we did see President Trump. Prime Minister had dinner with him in September when he came to the United Nations. We did offer the same to Vice President Harris, but alas, it wouldn't schedule, and the Harris team have put out a warm statement to that effect. So we try to be as balanced as we can. And one part of what the embassy does is very much to make sure that we have contacts in every part of the American system that's relevant to Britain. And that means a lot of contacts because in very many ways, this is the most important single bilateral relationship Britain has. It's relevant on the economic side to jobs and investment. It's obviously relevant on defense and security. So we have a lot invested in America, metaphorically.
And just to develop that a little bit more, give us a sense of why America matters so much. You are our most senior ambassador around the world. Why is it that Britain sees the US relationship as being so central?
I think a lot of countries see their bilateral relationship with America as being central, to be honest. But it's central to us, partly because of the interoperability of our armed forces and our intelligence agencies. There are lots of places in the world where we work very closely together. I myself, like you, Rory, have seen these shared endeavours in war and peace in Afghanistan, in the Balkans. We very often have exactly the same goals. We very often want to achieve them in the same way. And we have this focus on open societies and open markets that I think is different from some other allies. Partly built on common law, partly built on history, partly built on a shared sense of right and wrong. And we just work very closely with the Americans on trade and investment. And it's not all about governments. British firms, something like 1.7 million Brits go to work every day in Britain for American firms, and something like 1.2 million Americans go to work every day in America for British firms. So there's a lot of intertwining. And in any year, something like $1 trillion flows backwards and forwards across the Atlantic in trade and investment. Now, we both believe in freedom of navigation, in upholding freedom of navigation. So we just simply work more closely with the Americans, regardless of who is the president or the prime minister of the day, than we do with any other single country. And I would say, you know, well, what's known here as a tier one ally, a day one, night one ally, I think probably we are only America's ally, the only ally of America with truly global reach. And that means we do a lot together.
Karen, before I let you go, I want to ask a little bit about how you sort of repair things when they get a little bit tricky. And they got a little bit tricky recently when there was this kerfuffle over there being a few Labour Party people at the convention, and Donald Trump got a bit upset about it and said a few things. And of course, we had the history of your predecessor, Kim Darroch, frankly getting the boot because Trump was upset about it. How important are those relationships that you and your team build at every level? Because I think people don't really know how embassies and how diplomacies work. How do you sort of get the relationship so that you can calm something like that down fairly quickly? Assuming that you did calm it down fairly quickly.
Well, it's actually the Labour Party, Alastair. It's not the Labour government or the embassy. And it's not even the Labour Party, the institution, who sent people here. It was individuals. So that isn't anything to do with us. But we did push London to be able to give an easy explanation. There is a complaint from the Republican Party before the Federal Election Commission, but that will be for the Labour Party to answer, not the embassy, not the government. But it really helps on these occasions to know people that you can ring up and you can offer background explanations and you can acknowledge that they're upset and you can acknowledge why, and then you can explain what has really happened. And depending on the issue, not this particular issue, because as I say, not to do with the embassy, but you can help sort it out. You can try and get to a better place. You can say, we can't help you on X, but we can help you on Y. And it's fundamentally the job of the embassy here to work with all parties, Democrat and Republican, so the Harris campaign, the Trump campaign, the Biden administration, so that when we need to make phone calls to sort something out, we can do so.
Well, I think, if I may say so, Karen, you just displayed why you are the number one diplomat getting the big gigs, because that was a beautifully diplomatic answer, which told me.
Can you tell her we like her headband?
Yeah, and also Anthony Scaramucci, who, as you probably know, is a fashion icon.
Absolutely.
He wants you to know that he loves your headband. Okay.
Oh, that's very kind. That's made my day.
Karen.
I'll keep it on for all the watch parties then.
Lovely. Karen, have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
See you soon. Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks. So I think now we're going to take some of your questions, viewers. I hope that we are. I know we've been getting lots, and so you guys weren't able to hear that, were you?
No, I heard it.
You heard a bit? Okay.
Heard,
Yeah, she's got a great understanding of where we need to be.
Yeah, what did you make of it? I mean, because you as the guy who and I think you're being genuine, you say it is the number one relationship.
I don't even think it's close, Alastair. I think the problem is I think the Brits probably don't see it the way the Americans do. The Americans are like, this is our go-to ally. The English-speaking nations of Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, when we have a go-to problem...
Don't forget New Zealand. Never forget New Zealand.
I apologize. When we have a go-to problem, those are the people we go to.
But I remember so much being challenged on that, particularly under Hillary Clinton and early Biden administration, people saying, to be honest, we care much more about Germany and Angela Merkel than Europe. I think this is more a sort of... I think you're being very nice to us, but I certainly had a lot of people close to Hillary Clinton, close to Joe Biden, who said they're moving on from the world.
So let me tell you, this could be a Trump-centric view then, because he
loves Britain. Yeah,
he is an Anglophile.
Yeah.
Okay, he loves the royal family, and he loves the association with.
Yeah, but hold on, he walked in front of the Queen. You can't do that.
Well, he doesn't know better than that.
He
can't do that.
He's from Queens.
Now listen.
Probably was tripping over his tie. I mean, the tie was probably too long.
Question here from Ben Winter. I think this one is probably for you, Anthony,
Okay.
but then I think we should all maybe get involved, because this is a big issue. What will happen if Trump refuses to concede the election in the event of a Harris win?
Violence or without violence? So let's talk about both. Without violence, I don't think not much. It'll be like what happened with Joe Biden. You know, he goes away, she gets inaugurated. With violence, he's going to jail. And that sentencing will take place on the 26th of November. I don't think there's any question about it. If he's out there on a megaphone saying, kill your fellow neighbor, the election was rigged, ransack the Capitol, they will put him in jail on the 26th of November.
Hold on, surely the court
here in the
case-
city of
surely
New
the
York.
judge in the court case just has to judge the case that is before him or her, not.
Okay. All right. Well, that's how it's supposed to work. But I'm telling you, he's going to jail.
Okay.
Okay. You know, I mean, look, I mean, listen, there are rules and then there are rules. And I think they have told him, if you foment violence in this country after a free and fair election,
Yeah, but
with your nonsense.
he doesn't play by the rules, does he?
No, he doesn't. But I don't think Trump wants to go to jail.
Okay.
I'll stipulate to you, he loves money, he loves attention, he wants to be on the top of the broadsheet fold every day of his life, but he doesn't want to wear the orange jumpsuit.
Okay.
Can I bring in Dominic on this? So, Kathy Kay often says that she's very, very struck when she's traveling around the country by just how many weapons there are,
Yeah.
by how crazy some of the things that are being sold on Trump merch,
Yeah.
Mike Pence with nooses around his neck. What's your sense on whether you feel there's a real risk?
It's an interesting one. We did a podcast, and the rest is history. I think it was our third episode on civil wars, why they happen. And on that podcast, we were talking about America as if you were going to pick any Western country, any industrialized democracy to have a civil war, you would pick America. I mean, you're not going to pick, Slovenia, are you? And the reason for that is the availability of weaponry.
You might pick the Balkans.
You might. But I would say you have ready availability of guns. You have political polarization, and you have a lot of people, and this is what I think is so toxic, you have a lot of people who think that their opponents are a genuine threat to the health and survival of the republic.
And you have incredible amounts of misinformation.
And once you get into that, I mean, this goes back to what you were saying about polarization. I think once you get into that arena, it's actually really hard to row back. How do you get out of that and to get back to a kind of more pluralistic idea of democracy in which, there are good people on both sides of the aisle? So my sense is, imagine that this is not the end of something. That Trump maybe goes away, but Trumpism doesn't.
And what it would look like, because that's something that's quite interesting that people are talking about. Like, it's not going to look like a civil war because this is quite a big army to go up against.
Right.
So they have a very big army. But it can look like the Troubles. It can look like an insurgency. It can look like that.
It can look
it
like
would look more like
what
that.
we've had.
Yeah.
I mean, it could look like people bursting into the Capitol, ransacking the Capitol. It could look like bombs going off at polling stations.
But one of the most depressing things you can see today is all these DAs, all these chiefs of police going out, doing these preemptive press conferences, putting barbed wire outside elections. We've got snipers on the roof. To me, whatever happens, that is his legacy. That is the legacy of his movement, which is that you cannot guarantee that there will be a peaceful transfer of power in America. I mean, this is so extraordinary when I consider when I was growing up that we would ever have thought this. But to have snipers on the roof, to have barbed wire, to have all these people saying, we'll come for you, we'll come for you if you come for us.
But you could say, Marina, that actually the period when you and I were growing up was the anomaly. And that American politics has always been unusually violent. They had a civil war in the 1860s.
It's only been a full democracy for 60-odd years.
It's a frontier society, a lot of guns. The rhetoric has always been much more heightened than in other Western countries. But this is not unusual.
Do you think that consensus, or all around the world, maybe even in the UK, was to some extent the anomaly, that post-war thing?
Absolutely, totally.
And that actually we all have these rose-tinted glasses because of when we were born in that time.
Because everybody thinks the 50s were the norm.
Yeah, and great people went into politics.
Right.
They were forged in the fire of this national event. And actually, politics was dreadful before then, and maybe it's dreadful now.
That's exactly what I think. Yeah, that's exactly what I think.
Okay.
There's over 400 million guns in the country.
400 million.
400 million. There's 330 million people. 20% of the people do not own a gun. So it's concentrated in the 80% of the other people.
Do you own a gun?
I do own a gun because my family's from northeastern Pennsylvania, and we were taught how to hunt by my dad.
So you have a hunting rifle. You don't have
I have a Winchester semi-automatic. I know how to take it apart, I know how to clean it, and how to shoot it because of my father. Yeah. But I'm not a handgun enthusiast.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, next question, please. Alexander, I don't want to say because it's about women that this is for you, Marina, but you know what I mean. This is for you.
Oh, I'm the one with the uterus on the panel, so let's have it.
You don't have the most makeup on, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Want to make sure people know.
Is the trend of more women voting in early stages going to follow through Or are men going to turn up in surprising amounts today? Well, maybe that isn't for you, but
Well, okay, first of all, the honest answer is I don't know. Like, anecdotally, you can see that lots of women are turning out, and as Rory said, we know that women turn out. What I do think is interesting is what the Trump campaign did, which is slightly reminding me of what Corbyn's supporters did at some point. They said, we don't need these people who used to vote for us because we're going to go out and get people who've never voted.
New people.
And these new people, we're going to get new voters. And Trump, when he's going on things like Logan Paul's podcast and things like that, he is trying to reach people who are unregistered young men. Now, do I think those unregistered young men who listen to Logan Paul's podcast and all the others like it that Trump has gone on have got off their asses and registered? I would say it's more likely that women are going to turn up and show up, and I don't think that those young men are going to come through, but I'm very prepared to be depressed and wrong.
Okay.
5 a.m.
Well, listen, we're going to take another little break, and then we're going to be joined by Richie Torres, who is a very exciting congressman here in New York for what I call the right party, by which I do not mean the right-wing party, I mean the Democrats. Back in a minute. Welcome back to The Rest is Politics, live stream here from New York, where it's now getting darker and darker, but hopefully brighter and brighter politically as the night goes on. And we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Richie Torres, congressman from here in New York. You guys met on a plane.
We did, and I'm so pleased that you've come to join us, because I've been a real fan of Richie Torres. He's a very, very unique American politician, inspirational figure. Very lucky to have you with us tonight. I guess you will have been out campaigning a great deal because you're up for election now. This is, just to remind British viewers, this is not just a presidential election. All you Congress people are up for election at the moment. Tell us a little bit about the feeling on the streets, and have you been campaigning outside New York, or have you mostly been in New York?
So I've been mostly, so there are both presidential and congressional races, right? The fate of the presidency, the Senate, and the House all hang in the balance.
And so you've been campaigning your own congressional district here in New York, but do you
You're
also
pretty
get
safe, aren't you?
Yeah, I represent one of the most Democratic districts in America, so I could be in a vegetative state and it still would be a Democratic
Don't
state.
say that. Don't say that.
No, I'm sure you've been doing a lot of
But
hard
look,
work.
we have a historic opportunity to make history. We could president of the United States, as well as the first African-American speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, to be the Speaker of the House. And so there's just palpable excitement on the ground about the history that we can make.
We keep hearing that a lot of young black men are voting for Trump. Now, one, is that your experience when you've been maybe away from here? But secondly, if that is happening, why do you think that might be happening?
Look, I'm cautiously hopeful that Vice President Harris in the end will consolidate the black vote. But, there could be ironies in the 2024 presidential election. We could see Vice President Harris overperforming among white voters who have historically voted Republican, particularly women. And we could see Donald Trump overperform among voters of color who have historically voted for the Democrats. So this election has the opportunity to upend the conventional wisdom about the relationship between demographics and voting behavior.
Anthony, why would a young black guy from a kind of working class background look at somebody like Trump and think, I can vote for him?
So I participated in 3 or 4 of these town hall meetings for the vice president in the Philadelphia area, and I think it's wrong, by the way. I think most of them are voting for her. I think the ones that would say that they're in dissent, some of it has to do with her law enforcement record. Some of it has to do with the feeling that they've been left out of the equation in some way, shape, or form. And so it's almost like a protest vote if they're voting for Trump. It's not necessarily anything more than that. I've yet to find somebody that says, oh, I'm all for Trump and Trumpism and MAGA. It's more of a protest vote. They feel left out. Okay. Richie, what's your response to that?
Look, I think if Kamala Harris wins, it's because of abortion. And if Donald Trump wins...
You think that is the number one thing?
No question. I feel like I'm actually cautiously optimistic we're going to see a wave of female voters who carry Vice President Harris to victory, because there have been 3 presidential elections in which Donald Trump has been the Republican nominee. And what distinguishes 2024 from the rest is the public backlash against the reversal of Roe versus Wade. I feel, as evidenced by the 2022 midterms here in the United States, it's going to motivate women to come out in much higher numbers. The majority of the electorate is female, and Vice President Harris is likely to be at the winning end of the gender gap in voting.
And were you going on to say if Trump were to win?
If Trump wins, it's probably because of inflation and immigration, because young men in particular have been hit hard by the crushing cost of gasoline and groceries. And in fact, were it not for those issues, I doubt Donald Trump would be remotely competitive.
Tell us a little bit about this, because often commentators look at the big macroeconomic figures, which seem pretty positive over the last few years, but then often ordinary voters talk about cost of living. Tell us from your own constituents' experience what they've seen.
Look, I represent one of the poorest congressional districts in America, and there's no question that my constituents are struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills and keep their families afloat, and are confronting higher costs at the gas pump, at the grocery store. Now, these are mostly attributable to supply chain disruptions during COVID, but whoever's the incumbent president is going to be blamed for whatever happens. And so we are facing a complicated electoral environment. You know, the majority of Americans do disapprove of the Biden administration. The majority of Americans do feel the country's on the wrong track. And that's the greatest challenge that we face as the incumbent party. But Donald Trump is so radioactive, so unpopular, that we could potentially overcome that challenge.
Congressman, I don't want to flatter you, but for our British viewers, I think they need to understand you. You've taken very strong positions on things like Israel. Yeah. You've taken very strong positions on what black men need to do better in their lives in terms of their self-aspiration. You are a real leader and you have a real backbone. Okay, so where are you getting it from? Is it your family? Is it your internal constitution? And why do we have so many spineless Republicans? So let's start with you. How did you get your spine? And then why do we have so many spineless Republicans?
Yeah.
You probably know better about the second part.
Oh, I know why we do, but I want to hear from Richie. Because he's a bold guy.
Everything that's wrong with me, I should be blamed, and everything that's right with me, all the credit goes to my mother.
Okay, there you go.
When I won my primary in June of 2020, when I knew I was going to be a congressman, I publicly said that before I was a congressman or a councilman, I'm first and foremost the son of my mother, Deborah Bosselette. And for me, there's no greater honor than representing the Bronx, which is full of single mothers like mine, who have suffered and struggled and sacrificed so that their children and grandchildren can have a fighting chance at the American dream. So I would not be here were it not for the sacrifices that my mother made. And she's the heart and soul of the Democratic Party.
And just tell us the strong position on Israel. Just tell us how much Israel-Gaza is going to play out in this election, do you think? I know it's a big question, but it's been so dominant in the global media debate in recent
less than you would think. I'm convinced that the election is going to be mostly determined by the economy, immigration, and abortion. But obviously for the Jewish community, right, Israel is a central issue. The same is true for the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim community in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And certainly losses at the margins in either one of those communities could decide the outcome of the election. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to win the majority of the Jewish community.
And your position?
My position? Mm-hmm. I'm a strong supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship. For me, October 7th was objectively the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, and I've been crystal clear that Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas in the wake of October 7th, just like the United States had a right to defend itself against Al-Qaeda in the wake of 9/11. You know, I tell people, imagine if American homes had been invaded and American children and civilians had been murdered and maimed, and 260 young Americans were gunned down at a New York City festival, and American women were raped, and thousands of rockets were fired into American homes and communities. Like, how would you feel in the face of such overwhelming terror? How would you expect your government to respond in the face of such barbarism?
Okay, I accept that, but then when the response happens and Netanyahu says that the goal is to take out the leadership of Hamas, and then they do that, but then they carry on, and you see what's happening in northern Gaza now. The world just sort of looks at it and think, why can't the politicians sort this?
Yeah. No, it's a tragedy. I mean, every war, especially the war in Gaza, is a humanitarian crisis. It is a tragedy. But the concern is that if Hamas remains in power, it's not going to abandon its genocidal ambitions to destabilize Israel. It could rearm, it could relaunch, and launch even deadlier terrorist attacks than the atrocities of October 7th. And so I could understand why Israel feels the need to remove Hamas from power permanently.
So Rishi, tell us about the immigration issue. Why is that so central? What is it that worries people about the immigration issue?
Yeah, so since 2022, we've seen unprecedented waves of migration. And even here in New York, we've been ground zero for overwhelming waves of migration. It's put enormous strain on our shelter system, on our social safety net. It's doubled the homeless population. We have well over 100,000 people in our shelter system, many of them migrants. And so that has elevated immigration to the center of American politics. There are 7 swing states. One of the states that we are unlikely to win on the Democratic side is Arizona, because immigration is the number one issue there. And immigration, just like abortion is a losing issue for the Republicans, immigration has become objectively a losing issue for the Democrats.
Anthony said that you were sort of a very, very special politician, okay? I don't think I've ever met a politician who has got such amazing eye contact. Do you do that? I mean, have you noticed that?
It's great.
I mean, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Yeah. Is that something you just do with everybody?
There's actually a fly on your nose. I don't know if you notice it. You see it there, Richie?
I'm so captured by your beauty.
No, but you even did it with him.
This is my bro, man. This is my New Yorker. You see the fly there, Richie? You see it right there?
But the only other guy who gets close to it, in my experience, is Bill Clinton. Yeah. There you go.
Well, I know I've met Bill Clinton once, and I'm no Bill Clinton, so.
Well, you're a people person, though, I can tell that.
Well, I do my best.
He's the future of the Democratic Party. He's the future of New York statesman. He is a real public servant. He's not like these bozos, honestly. I mean, the great thing about this is our show. It's not like cable news. We can say whatever the hell we want. You are somebody that I greatly admire because you've taken positions. And a lot of the time, you've had to go against your own party on certain positions, and you've held your own, and I have a lot of respect for it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, listen, it's been great to meet you.
Of course.
Rory's been talking about you a lot since we met you on that plane. I hope we can get you onto the podcast interviews that we do. It was like a full hour. We'll do that down the track. But thanks very, very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Good luck tonight.
Of course.
Thank you.
Now, earlier we had the discussion about who has fought the better campaign, Harris or Trump. And we asked you for your views, and some 28,000, it seems, have taken part. Let's see what you thought. There you go. Must be happy with that. Do you think that's a bit one-sided?
Yeah, I'm afraid there may be a bit of confirmation bias going on with our people. I mean, if Trump wins, will it be that he ran a better campaign, or will it be, as Richie suggested just now, that the fundamentals, the cost of living and immigration are what played to him?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was interesting. I mean, given that Richie is very much a Democrat.
Mm-hmm. He was very blunt, wasn't he, about some of the problems?
Surprisingly blunt. Yeah. And the less spin than you'd expect from a British politician. Actually, I think a British politician on election night would be spinning and spinning and spinning, not saying, let's be honest about the fact that our net popularity rating is down, the approval rating's down.
You and I sat on the Channel 4 set through the entire election. I think that is what a lot of British people loathe about our politicians, that they pretend all the time. I was really taken aback by that guy. Honestly, the thing about the eye contact was extraordinary. Seriously, it was really, he absolutely held you in his eye. And in a really warm...
Look, I love the guy. I think we're going to be criticized because there was a little bit of a fawning session, but he has broken the rules of what's going on right now, where everybody gets in their lane with their party and toes the line. He's really trying to serve the people of his district. Could I ask you something, if you don't mind? If you were going to say 2 great things about the Trump campaign, observing it over the last year and a half, what would they be?
I've got to say great things.
Yeah.
I think he has an extraordinary ability to virtually to brainwash people, and that is not to be underestimated. He's got a charisma that I don't understand, but it's clearly very, very real.
So that's one. What's the second one?
I think the second one would be that he has, for somebody of his age, he has incredible energy. But I can't say much more positive than that. How would you answer that?
I would have said exactly the same. I would have said he's an extraordinarily resilient politician to have lost. I mean, the only president who was kicked out and then came back to win was Grover Cleveland, 1892. If Trump does it, he will be the second. It's an extraordinary thing to do. Most people don't do it.
Well, it would be the greatest political comeback in U.S. history, in my mind. 34 felonies, a civil rape conviction. I'm just going over the facts. And he returns to the American presidency, would be unheard of.
And he has a kind of primal magnetism
Yeah.
that most politicians,
He
frankly,
wants
do
it
not have.
so much, and there's something. It's almost like he's in sport. You see it in sport. Someone who wants it that much, I suppose.
Lance Armstrong.
Can I tell you? Can I tell you my two things quickly?
Yeah.
He has the best instincts in American politics. And what Richie said about Arizona, Trump believes that the immigration is the biggest issue. Susie Wiles goes to him, talk about the economy, talk about inflation, talk about your economic plans. You're 10 points ahead of her. Nope, want to talk about immigration. They're eating the dogs and the pets and the cats. He wants to dehumanize people. Second thing is, he's run this campaign without his family. And I will tell you right now, I would have never bet that, because he does everything with his family. He did the real estate business with his family, The Apprentice with his family, the White House with his family, but he did this without his family.
Interesting. Well, Ivanka Trump put out the weirdest set of tweets today. It was like a kind of self-help book.
It was very moving. It was very moving.
But it didn't even mention Trump.
Yeah, I did. I made it all the way through the thread.
Did you?
Alastair shared it with the world.
17.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right,
Yeah,
No, we're gonna actually, because we've got to pay for all the sort of, the helicopter to get you here,
the makeup,
and all that stuff that we're doing, the makeup and the hair. We have a sponsor to thank, and that is Rory.
It is NordVPN. So huge thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this live stream. So NordVPN, for those of you that have not been focused on the details of our podcast, amazing protection device that you can put, and we have on all our laptops, on our cell phones, to protect us from malicious websites, protect us from spyware. And you can sign up if you go to nordvpn.com/restispolitics for the best discount available.
Great. Now, we want to talk now about sort of the role of America in the world, I guess. And because, of course, we know Trump's policy is America first, but Joe Biden's had a fair bit of America first as well. Maybe has been a little bit a bit more isolationist than you might expect from a Democratic Party candidate, leader. So, Dominic, let's imagine Trump becomes president, Kamala Harris becomes president. How do they see their relationship with the rest of the world?
Well, a word that I don't think we've used at all is Ukraine in this podcast, and arguably the one place apart from America that is watching this most closely is Ukraine, because I think that's the place that will most be affected.
And Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Harris, as far as we can tell, is an internationalist. She's not particularly a foreign policy thinker. She doesn't really have a tremendous grounding in foreign policy. That's fine, because my sense is that she's very much a kind of consensus politician on foreign policy.
Although when you look at her travelogue as vice president, she has been to many, many parts of the world. And, as the vice president, it's not like a kind of a number two from Britain or Greece or Italy. The vice president goes abroad, they get treated like the head of state.
Yeah.
So she knows the people.
But it would have been weird, wouldn't it? Because she was a prosecutor. She was very, very domestic focused. Yeah. And then she was a senator for a very short period.
So she doesn't have the grounding.
Almost the first time she got to any of these places.
Do you think she has a worldview?
The last 4 years.
My sense would be that her worldview is, dare I say, the kind of liberal establishment worldview, and she would not be into blowing up NATO. She would be, I would guess, into continuing aid to Ukraine, but maybe not at the same level as before. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't. I think the climate is changing on that a little bit, isn't it? In a way that is not advantageous to the fight in Ukraine.
Marina, do you have a sense of a Kamala Harris kind of foreign policy identity?
No, I don't really. And I think that, the unipolar kind of globalized world, as you say, that has fallen away, and that I don't have her take on the sort of struggle of what's going to come afterwards. And I don't see her at all as someone whereas, Biden, obviously we knew that he was interested in foreign policy, and there were we knew where he stood on various things. But she says there's nothing. I wouldn't have done anything differently.
Yeah, but that's very hard. If you're the vice, he's still the
I
president.
know that was
he's
hard.
the president until the new year. It's very. I think we were talking earlier about this. It's very hard. How getting that change and continuity.
Sure, I think Dominic's right on the mood music for Ukraine. I don't think that's good at all. But you don't really have. I don't think of her as a foreign policy thinker at all. And I think that will be because you can't not be.
So I think first thing is she doesn't have a foreign policy team. So she will almost certainly take over Biden's foreign policy team, which means bringing in Jake Sullivan.
Do you think so?
Possibly keeping Samantha Power.
Definitely not Jake, though. Let me push back on that because they fight all day inside the White House, and Jake drops Oppo bombs on her left and right for the last 2 years. So definitely won't be Jake.
I don't see that.
And
You know,
Tony
she's tight with Tony.
Yeah.
So you
She
think
likes
Blinken could
Tony,
stay?
and Tony's helped her out a lot on the foreign policy stuff. But her and Jake are at war with each other.
Then question with Tim Walz. So he is very, very interesting on China. He obviously spent a lot of time in China, grew up in China. Not grew up in China, but developed a lot of his career and his time there. He's been to China, I think, more than before going into politics than any other American politician. Maybe less into the Cold War against China. We haven't seen much from him on that, whether he'll have any influence on that. Final thing is, I think, on Ukraine, getting another $50 billion together for Ukraine next year is going to be a big push, whoever comes in. And yet without it, it's very difficult to see how Ukraine holds its front line. It's American money that's keeping the whole thing going. And is the US going to be up for that big pool next year?
Who has the Senate? If you tell me who has the Senate, then I can tell you the answer to that. If she wins and she gets the Senate, then yes. If he wins, forget about it. Ukraine will be partitioned in 6 months. He'll give it to his buddy.
I asked David Miliband when he was here earlier who he thought China would prefer of the two. What's your answer to that? David kind of sat on the fence.
My sense would be that they would prefer stability, that they don't want instability, and that Trump represents uncertainty. Who do they want? A weak America, an America that might lash out, an America that will behave unpredictably? I wouldn't have thought so. I think if I was Chinese at the Chinese Communist Party, I would want the devil I know, an American who will behave in predictable ways. I would not want somebody who is likely to perform screeching U-turns and is prone to lashing out.
So I'm gonna respectfully take the other side. The Putin relationship with Xi is quite strong, stronger than people think, and Trump is a stage puppet for Vladimir Putin, and so he is an agent of his. It's just so obvious. He's done everything that Putin wanted him to do. Make Americans feel cynical about their elections, make Americans feel cynical about their process, be morally equivalent. You're no better than us here in Russia. All of that nonsense. And I would just tell people, and Richie understands this better than anybody, that the Putin-Trump relationship is very bad for Israel, very bad, because Putin's getting money from the Iranians for arms. He's selling oil on the black market through them, and he's tight with the Chinese, and they can run, because this is what he did. He was a KGB agent in Berlin. He can run his boy Trump if Trump gets in office. And that's the facts.
And Rory, what about the Middle East? One assumes that Bibi wants Trump.
Yeah. So Kamala Harris, the mood music is that she's a bit softer on Israel than Biden traditionally. And there have been gestures towards showing empathy for Gaza more than we were getting out of Biden. But that's been reined in because she's playing a very, very down-the-line, straight election campaign. Will she spread her wings after she gets in? I mean, is it possible? Do you think, Dominic, that when she gets in, a different side of her might... I mean, is the precedent on that presidents run very conventionally and then their personality comes out a bit more once they're in office?
I'm not convinced by that, and maybe this is a good question for Alastair, actually. Do people perform differently in office once they've got into how they were in opposition or where they were campaigning? I'm not... And the idea that people suddenly, they shed their skin, I'm not convinced about that. I think I would be very surprised if she wins, if after January you see a different Kamala Harris in the Middle East or in anything else.
Let me just take that first. I mean, I think what I'd say, normal candidates And I'll say why I think she's not a normal candidate. She's not a normal candidate because she's the vice president and she's been part of this administration at a very senior level for the past 4 years. But I think what does happen to people when they go from opposition into government and go from candidate to being senior government official is the extent to which they find foreign policy really interesting. And start to spend a lot more time and focus on it.
They find it seductive.
It's
and it takes
incredibly
them away,
seductive.
and suddenly you're the leader of the free
But
world.
also, I think what happens is that they then, if they don't have a worldview, they feel the need to develop a worldview. But I think if you're the president of America, I think you have to have a worldview.
Maybe that's what she's been doing on all her trips, but she's kept it quiet.
Well, but that's because she's been number two to a guy who really takes foreign policy seriously.
Dominic, Harry Truman didn't realize that we had a bomb when he was vice president.
Right.
He had one lunch with FDR. They ignored him. John Kennedy thought that there was a missile gap. Remember, he campaigned on a missile gap.
Late 50s.
He got into office. We had a surplus of missiles.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, when they get the job and they get the full 360 of the information, how do you think that changes them?
Oh, I think it definitely changes them, but I think it depends on the temperament, the personality you take into the office when you get there. Harry Truman's a brilliant example. He was a failed haberdasher from Kansas City, if I remember right?
From Missouri.
And he gets in. Nobody's heard of him when Roosevelt picks him as his vice president.
Not college educated.
Right, exactly. The little guy, the quintessential little guy, and he's the best example, I think, in American history of somebody who rises to the challenge, who actually finds that the kind of common sense, small town qualities that got him into politics in the first place are rewarded. And he shines when he's in the Oval Office. But he's an unusual example because of that, I think. So there are people who blossom, who change. But by and large, I think what you see Alastair, again, may disagree with this, your experience with Tony Blair and whatnot. But I think what you see most often is that people become more themselves under the stress and the pressure.
More themselves?
Yeah, they become more exaggerated.
They become
People don't
exaggerated
change,
versions of
exaggerated
themselves.
versions of themselves.
Yeah, I think that might be right. I don't know about that. Yeah. Say what you're going to say, Rory, I'll think about it.
China, I think, is, Dave Miliband's right. China is going to be the big question. I've just come back from Australia. Obviously, the Australians are obsessed with what the US-Australian relationship is against China. Japan's thinking about that. South Korea's thinking about that. The Philippines is thinking about that. But at the same time, the US is having a real problem finding other allies in the region.
Yeah.
Singapore doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Malaysia doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Indonesia doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Thailand is semi-detached. So I think what we're going to see over the next 4 years, whoever comes in, is the question of whether the US is going to be able to build the coalition for this decoupling from China, and whether we're going to find Xi Jinping pushed into a more aggressive position.
Just a quick question. Do you think that the U.S. citizens know that we have Marines in Darwin? Do you think the U.S. citizens know that?
Well, do they know that you've got 50,000 troops in Japan, 20,000 troops in South Korea? I mean, it's an enormous investment. But I do think this is where American politics is going to go. And it is a big question with Kamala Harris. Does she have the instincts, the experience to be able to work out whether she's being led down the garden path by securocrats on this, or whether there genuinely is a threat?
But I'm sorry to return to the tech firms, but I do think that this is really significant. They depend utterly on that partnership with China. And that is going to be a really interesting schism, I think, to see how that's going to play out, because they don't want... Sorry, Alastair.
No, carry on.
No,
they don't want.
Their views are very, very different on China than many of the people who'll be advising her on foreign policy.
Yeah.
They depend on the partnership, and they can't really be the biggest companies in the world without it.
Yeah, and Marina, I know you're really brilliant on empathy and emotional intelligence. When I put my hand up like that, it doesn't mean stop talking.
Yes, it does.
It means this is the last. This is the last contribution. Before I then say, let's take some of your wonderful questions. So we're going to go to some of the questions. Oh, there's a good one, Isabel. Mooch, you might know this. Why didn't Ivanka show up?
I think she felt that she was steamrolled inside the White House I think the negative press was overwhelming to her. She's probably a little sensitive about that. The tweet thing that she put out on her 43rd birthday, she's aggrieved. She's dealing with a narcissistic father that has mental illness, and he's very tiresome. And she's trying to figure out a way to keep her family together, and she lost her mom a few years ago. And I think she's in a tough spot. And
She's got a husband who made hundreds of millions of pounds out of being the son-in-law of the president.
That's a separate topic. It's a separate topic.
Well,
I know
it erodes my
like,
sympathy, put it that way.
I don't like it any more than you like it, but I think that that is a very difficult dad to have as a dad. I think he's Fred Trump too. The stuff that Fred Trump did to Donald Trump, he did to his kids.
But that thread that she put out today, which was pretty extraordinary. Yes, it was on her birthday. It was lessons in life, and it was all this sort of holistic this and that and all the rest of it. But that presumably was deliberate. To do that on this day of all days and not even say, vote for my dad, was kind of weird.
Yeah, she ransacked quotes.com.
I just
and all the stuff that was on there, I was like, yeah, you haven't read any of these books. You've literally just gone on Brainy Quote. Or you've maybe seen this on Instagram with a picture of a signpost and then something by Jung underneath it.
She's been a victim of that man's, her 43 years, she's been victimized by that guy. And so did her mom, was victimized by him, and she's trying to figure it out. And I got, my heart goes out to her. Actually, I have empathy for her. And I'm not saying they should have made the billions of dollars or the millions of dollars. I think all of that was inappropriate. But
corrupt.
Let me ask you guys, some of you, I think all of you are parents, if you see Trump as mean and cruel, which he is, he's ran a cruel and mean campaign. You think he's not mean and cruel to his kids?
No, I'm sure he is.
I mean, it spills over into everything in his life.
Sure.
He saw it in the Oval Office. The guy was nuts.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a reason why there are 40 people that work for the son of a bitch that says, hey, this guy's crazy. You can't put him back in the Oval Office.
Next question. David McKenzie.
I apologize.
One from Trip Live. Who do each of the panel rank as, in their view, the greatest president and why? Do you want to start with you, Marina?
I'm going to be very boring and say Abraham Lincoln because of...
Hard not to.
Is it not? Yeah, sorry, it is quite a cliche, but yeah.
I regularly
he was quite good.
No, I think...
was quite good. And I also love the whole sort of team of rivals of it and the promotion of really amazing people and to not be threatened by that. And I think there's so much smallness and people who can't deal with that in our kind of contemporary politics, and I love I loved all that.
He's good, but he's not the best.
Okay.
The best is Franklin D. Roosevelt.
I love
he was my second.
look at this.
Oh, big man love going on.
We are forming such a bromance.
So FDR
did
did
you
two
read
things.
Nigel Hamilton's books on
FDR?
Yeah, FDR, the trilogy.
Did Nigel Hamilton do books on FDR?
He did.
The best one is
Tom's read them.
what's it? Jeffrey C. Ward, I think it is, who did the books on FDR's childhood.
Yeah, First-Class Temperament.
First-Class Temperament. Yeah. So FDR does two things. I think Lincoln is great, but Lincoln does one thing, which is win the Civil War, or lay the foundations for victory, or whatever. But I think FDR does two things. One is the New Deal, the Great Depression, on the domestic front. But the other thing that Lincoln doesn't do is FDR is a world statesman. He is so important in the defeating Nazism. Yeah. And I think that coupled with the Great Depression.
So he spoke German.
Him.
He spoke German. He read Hitler's speeches in German. He listened to Hitler on the radio. Remember, he lived in Germany for many years, and he understood it. And one of his ambassadors, you have to forgive me, I can't remember his name, he said, he had the talent of a dictator, but he was on the side of the angels. He had the cunning, he had the wiliness of a dictator.
His mother, was it Sarah?
Yeah,
she had him in long curls and dressed him in a girl's clothes until he was about 10 years old.
Yeah.
Well, one of the amazing things I think about these people is how many of them were underestimated, how many of them were dismissed as lightweights before they came in. And actually, it's rather splendid how, particularly, Truman created the entire international development framework for the world, having been underestimated. Yeah. LBJ was basically considered a bit of a Texas hick and came in and brought in the civil rights legislation. So, and with FBR, people thought he was a bit dim.
Yeah, they did.
And that first 100 days is just, this is why we talk about 100 days in Britain, right? I mean, he just whacked it through.
We haven't mentioned, he's had his polio, he is disabled, he is hiding that from people. And yet, again, this is it's a terrible thing to compare FDR to Trump. but that resilience.
Yep.
He has extraordinary drive and resilience that elevates him above his.
I'm not saying he's the greatest ever, but I'm going to give, on resilience, I'm going to give Bill Clinton very, very, very high marks.
I think he was a good president, but I think what Nixon would say about Clinton or others, it's the times that also makes the greatness. Think of what FDR had to go through. He went through the Depression, and there was the rise of fascism. He put down the first America First movement, which was started by Lindbergh and Huey Long. He suppressed that. He lent. You got to think about what we're doing with the Ukraine right now. He had a Lend-Lease program going on with Stalin and Churchill. And he fortified those two countries against the fascists. Okay, this guy was a world-class study, and also in Hamilton's book, the third book, he talks about the architecture of peace and the UN and all those acronyms that came out in the post-World War II order were from FDR. Truman enacted them, but FDR developed them.
So we've got over here, Rory. You're going to have the casting vote because we've got 2 for Lincoln, 2 for FDR.
I'm going FDR.
Okay,
FDR
FDR
I'm
wins.
going FDR, but I actually wanted to go LBJ. But if you have to give me that choice, I'll go FDR.
Oh, you would go LBJ
Yeah.
if it wasn't for that. Okay. Right, last question before I think we're going to a break soon. Kevin Stevens, we know which swing states we should look out for. Are there any counties declaring early that might indicate the outcome of that particular swing state? Well, I'm not going to answer that one.
So go.
I mean, this is a super geeky subject, which there are immense authorities on.
We like those.
So in Georgia, for example, you want to be looking at Baldwin County, which is 40% African American. There's another key county, Cobb and Wayne in Michigan, which again is 40% African American. So those are going to be ways of judging this big question of how the African American community is turning out, either for Harris or Biden.
Can I add 2
And then
counties?
Florida, very quickly, just before I come to you.
Yep.
The Hispanic communities in Florida, very early declaration, often in Dade, which gives us a good sense of where the Hispanic community is breaking and which might help us predict. Over to you.
So just quickly, Macomb in Oakland County in Michigan. That'll tell you basically that's the best, according to the Harris campaign, that's the best demography of the whole state. They have a sampling of everybody. And then, of course, Montgomery County, where I spent a lot of time. That's the 3rd largest county, but a very large African American population. If they turn out for her, she'll win that state.
Will we ever have a kind of unified electoral counting system? I mean, that's the other thing. We talk about the Electoral College, but also this. I think most people find it really weird that this takes so long. It's so different state to state, county to county.
This is the man on federalism. He understands federalism.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to get rid of the states. Like the way that it works is it's done by the states. And each state jealously guards its own system. They guard their own independence.
But they could learn from each other. They could modernise their systems.
Down deep, he's a big socialist, right?
I'm a central command kind of guy.
Yeah. He's all about the big state, this guy.
U.S. likes decentralization. Okay, we're going to take our decentralization, our class mobility.
But do American people are American people pretty comfortable with the system?
No, I think the system is creaky. But what I love about the system is it prevents the tyranny of the majority. But we don't have time for this. But the Republicans created a tyranny of the minority. They flooded the money into the states. They gerrymandered so that they could win the House of Representatives. And they figured out a way to rig the system so that they've got the House and 6 Supreme Court justices, but they only have 28% of the registered votes. How did they do that? Okay, it's a longer story, but we don't have time for it tonight. But you know, they're winning by taking advantage of the fear that the founders had about the tyranny of the majority. They flipped it on them.
The very weird thing looking at the swing states is that the very big states are already allocated, California, Texas, and now increasingly places like Florida. The very small states are almost all allocated. It's funny little kind of small to medium-sized states that are
It's states that are very diverse, actually. So someone like Pennsylvania, there are parts of Pennsylvania where, rural, towards the south of the state, that look more like the South. And then there are parts of the kind of college towns and very affluent look more like New England. Those are often the states that kind of flip. They're the interesting ones.
And that creates the odd geography, doesn't it? Because it's partly people moving to places like Arizona or Nevada that suddenly make states that looked as though they were quite homogenous suddenly become diverse.
Well, you were talking earlier about Arizona and Nevada, I think. And the massive demographic turnover, people moving in, and the ways in which you're offsetting the rural, which tends to be much more conservative, much more pro-Trump, with large transient college-educated populations.
Or Georgia, again, where you seem to have three groups, right? So you've got African-American voters who traditionally would vote Democrat, got poorer white voters who traditionally vote Republican, then you've got an increasing number of educated white voters who might vote Democrat.
Same in North Carolina, quite similar. Very highly educated, bit around Raleigh-Durham and then universities, and then more rural areas that are much more Republican.
Okay, Anthony, you're now going to have to get big energy, really do the mooch
We're
thing.
talking about Saley?
This is about Saley. You're doing another Saley spot.
Let me just fix my tie.
Go.
This is super important. Okay, this is a praise for our sponsor, Saley. I own that app. It's downloaded on my phone. And what it basically is an eSIM that you can use all over the world, which will reduce your roaming charges. And because you love us and we love you, you can go to our website. You can go to saley.com/TRIPUS and get a 15% discount. We love Saley. I am embarrassed to admit this. The tech guru of my life is Alastair Campbell. He introduced me to Saley.
Why are you laughing at Why are you laughing at that? Good. Thank you very much, Anthony.
There was no sarcasm.
No, not at all.
But there was righteousness for Saley.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're trying to locate the wonderful David Frum, who's due on, but we're struggling to locate him right now. We're going to talk about lots and lots of stuff after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Rest is Politics here in New York. Just to tell you that the polls have closed in eastern Kentucky and eastern Indiana, which sort of gives it a sense of being real. I want to tell you, by the way, that when we go off whenever we're going off for our little break and regroup and what have you, we'll be back at 5 a.m. UK time, which will be what here? Midnight US. God, I'm getting lost already. Are you all right?
I'm all right, yeah. And to bear in mind that is a time, if one or other is doing well, there'll be some pretty good results coming through. But if it's tight, there'll still be a long way to go. But this time in 2016, by midnight, people knew quite a lot.
Okay. Now, we're very pleased to have another guest. This is somebody that Rory and I interviewed on The Rest is Politics leading a few months back, and it got an extraordinary response, not just because of his political story and political experience, but also because of the discussion we had about the tragic death of his daughter and an incredible piece of writing that he did about it. So please welcome David Frum, former speechwriter to George W. Bush, wearing a very impressive set of headphones, I have to say.
I'm trying to be professional about this.
Well, that's
I have an impressive, just off camera, there's an impressive microphone.
Okay. So, David, we've sort of banned all predictions on this on this podcast because it's kind of pointless where we are now. But, you know, I guess from your perspective, you're a bit like Anthony Scaramucci here, a kind of lifelong Republican who finds that you cannot possibly vote for Donald Trump. Just to explain to us what your journey was on that.
So I'm a bit older than Anthony, maybe quite a bit. The first American political campaign I took part in, I grew up in Canada, so there are some earlier Canadian campaigns, was the campaign of 1980, where I knocked on doors for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. I remember the intense emotion about that time. In many ways, that race was a little bit like this one because it was very close until about the last 2 weeks, and then suddenly it was not very close. I was pulled into Republican politics because my early fundamental commitment, I'm a child and grandchild of people who came out of Europe and in the face of the Nazi oppression you were mentioning earlier, was the understanding of the indispensability of American power to a safe world. But I was also a great believer in trade and free markets, and that was the Republican Party that I knew and that supported for many, many decades. And in the past decade, the Republican Party has reversed itself. Everything I cared about: strong American presence in the world, free trade, free markets, impartial government, protection of the American Constitution, all of that has gone out the window. And we find ourselves tonight, I used to do inauguration morning TV, which I do not recommend to anybody. The programming starts at 9 a.m. There's absolutely nothing to say. The inauguration is noon. It can be very cold on those metal bleachers. And so to fill time, we would emit cliches about the ancient tradition of the peaceful transfer of power. Now, this is a little bit of American vanity because the Danes don't make a big hullabaloo about it when they have a peaceful transition of power. When one prime minister steps out of 10 Downing Street to hail a taxi, and another one carries his own suitcases into 10 Downing Street, no big accolade, but that transition, that tradition is over. The clock reset to zero. The American tradition of the peaceful transition of power is shorter than that of Moldova and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, both of which had peaceful transitions in 2019. And that's because of Donald Trump, and that's why we're here tonight.
David, one of the things that's so shocking is that the race feels and the polls so close. How is that possible? Presumably there would have been part of you that would have felt after 2020, this guy's been found out, and that the kind of Republican politics that you believed in, a more moderate, more centrist Republican politics, would reassert itself, and you presumably would have predicted that the particular path that Trump went down was not a good electoral path. But it looks at the moment as though it may almost be working out for him.
Well, two answers to that. The first is, let's remember the tremendous bedrock stability of a two-party system, which is what, unlike much of the democratic world, we still have here. So in 1932, one of the worst years in American history, people going hungry, President Herbert Hoover running for a second term, presiding over the greatest economic catastrophe in American history, he got, I think, about 39% of the vote. And I mean, it wasn't close, but still, I mean, that's a lot for Herbert Hoover. And there are lots of people who said things like, well, I don't like the Depression, but I applaud his position on the prohibition of alcohol, and I can never vote for a Democrat. And so they stuck with it. The second is, I'm not sure it is that close. I am not so sure.
Well, I don't think it's that close either, but the polls seem to be suggesting it, and you and I are outliers here. Everybody else is telling us it's a...
Well, there is one of the stories that I think we'll be doing later. And look, you did this discussion after the Brexit vote, after so many others, is something polling in the 2010s and 2020s has not been as good as it was in the 1980s and 1990s. And there's social and there are technological reasons for that. And there are a lot of pollsters, and they're looking over each other's shoulders. And when you talk to pollsters, they tell you if they get a result that the people who are paying their bills think is wrong, and even not in a nefarious way. I'm not talking about the bad ones, like, well, I won't name anybody, the reputable ones. If they get an outlier poll, they're under pressure to reweight it, to make it look like everyone else's. And so there is this tremendous conformity in the polling industry. Because remember, look, you do a poll, 1,000 people. How many men, how many women should you have? How many young, how many old? How many black, how many white? How many rural, how many urban? The model of the electorate is the thing we want to know, and it's the thing the pollster has to start with. The assumption at the beginning of the polling process, that how many urban people do I want versus how many rural? That is an editorial judgment that bakes into the beginning of the poll the answer we want to come out of the end of the poll.
David, the last time you and I saw each other was at the Max Boot biography of Ronald Reagan, and I want to bring up Ronald Reagan for a moment. Should Trump lose tonight, what happens to our former party or our current party? It doesn't seem like to me that they go back to the party of Reagan or Bush. So what do you think happens, sir?
Well, you've been more close to it more recently, so I'll defer to your judgment. But I think there's a battle. And there are two main paths forward, and I can name the people who will lead each path. One path will be the path that will say, look, the problem with Trump was he was undisciplined, he had a poor work ethic, he needlessly alienated gettable people. But look at his achievements, winning non-college Hispanic men. That is a real thing. Let's build on that. And that will, somebody like J.D. Vance or somebody like that will say, what we need is a harder working, more responsible, less obviously nakedly corrupt version of Trump. And then there will be Republicans who say, let us look at the debacle that is impending on the Republican women's vote. Let us look at the losses in the suburbs. Let's look at the fact that since the end of the Cold War, Republicans have won have won more votes than the Democrats exactly once in 2004, and we need a broader coalition. And I think you'll see governors, maybe Brian Kemp, maybe possibly Greg Abbott, who hasn't gone this way in a while, but has somebody like that will say what we need to do is we need to focus on the things we don't have versus the J.D. Vance will say let's build on what we have, but with a stronger work ethic.
David, you and I have talked before about your former boss and a president that I regularly get criticised for being nice about, namely George W. Bush. Why do you think he has not expressed a view in this election?
Because he's a deeply savvy political animal and understands that Donald Trump would like nothing better than for George W. Bush to insert himself into this race and make himself the topic of discussion.
Because, and why would that be? Why would that help Trump? Because
if George W. Bush endorses, then we start talking about the George W. Bush presidency, and we talk about Iraq. We talk about a lot of things that are not germane to today. So it is really smart for him to pull himself out and to say, you know what, this election is about tomorrow. You do not need to be distracted. I don't think there's a lot of doubt. Look, when the
Who do you think he's voted for?
I think he probably wrote in Paul Ryan, something like that. But 50 years from now, when the Oxford History of America produces its volume on the Trump years, I think it will be titled, "That Was Some Weird Shit, the Trump Years." I mean, they will use, George Bush wrote, in his vivid writing style, wrote the epitaph on the Trump years. There's no doubt about where he is, what his judgment of Trump, but does he need to be at the center of the story? One of the things that he would understand very well is the power of not speaking.
David, there's just been a tweet from Donald Trump, which we put up on the thing, and we'll just put up again in a second, saying a lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia, law enforcement coming. Give us a sense of whether that's something we need to be worried about. Is this Trump manning up now for causing a huge kerfuffle when he loses?
Well, that is the smell of flop sweat, isn't it? But I'm not going to give many predictions, but I'm going to give one, which I think people really need to hold on to, because I think I'm very confident I'm right about this, and it's important, which is all this discussion of the risk of violence, I think is way, way overstated. The violence that happened in 2021 was not a spontaneous eruption from below. It was a conspiracy organized from above by a serving president. That's why it was so terrible, but that's also why it was so effective. If there is violence in 2021, the president could fail to order military force to protect the Capitol. The president who will be there, who will be in charge through this transition, will send whatever force is needed to protect institutions, will protect polling. The law will be upheld by the serving president, unlike the serving president in 2021. Second, that if you use force this time, after Donald Trump, should he lose, as it looks like he will, as he thinks he will, it will obviously be an illegal act. A lot of Trump supporters were kind of blurry on the difference between obeying the law and obeying the president, but Trump was the president. He asked them to come out. He arranged for the buses to bring them to Washington. There were sweatshirts and T-shirts printed. It will be wild, he said. He knew what was coming, and there was actually quite a coherent plan to disrupt the Electoral College, put Chuck Grassley in Mike Pence's chair, and send the election into the House of Representatives. If you raise violent hands against authority in 2024, there is no mistaking you are doing a criminal act against the law. And we will have a lot of We may have hooliganism, people break windows, people attack police cars, but that kind of organized attack on authority that you had in 2021 requires complicity from the top, and that complicity is not going to be present. And so I am not worried about serious violence this time.
So I think that's a brilliant assessment. David, I want to ask you one more hypothetical, if you don't mind. If it looks like Harris has won and she's going to get certified to win, Trump comes out before California closes and says that he's won the election. How do you think she handles that? How do you think the Biden administration handles that?
I think she handles it by laughing at him on television and being derisive and treating him like. I think this is one of her breakthroughs, and we saw it at the debate. Is many people, including his chief of staff, including you, who know him well, are frightened by him. But Harris's strategy, which has always been sort of a masterstroke, is to look disdainful. And that gets under his skin, and that also reassures the country. I think the Biden administration's approach will be to say, look, there's one president at a time. Now, much of this will be in the states, but the relevant states, Trump does not have friendly governors. He doesn't have a friendly governor who will collaborate with him in North Carolina. He doesn't have a friendly governor in Michigan. He doesn't have a friendly governor in Wisconsin. And the one place where he thinks he has a friendly governor, which is Georgia, he's actually got the guy who's looking for who wants Trump to lose, whom Trump has personally denounced, and is going to be running for the 2028 nomination himself in the event of a Trump defeat. And so I think that Brian Kemp may make some sympathetic noises about how very, very, very sorry he is that Donald Trump is losing so very, very badly. But he is such a very, very big loser, and maybe the party needs a less big loser next time.
David, it's a pleasure talking to you as ever. Thanks for joining us, and we'll put all the people who are watching and listening, we'll direct them to our newsletter, and we'll put your article about Miranda in there again. So hopefully you can get.
I appreciate that.
This is better than Bill Maher from Better Than Bill Maher.
Yes, but that's right. We've come to our treaty.
Great to see you.
God bless you, man.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Well, thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's live stream. Having a VPN is so useful for protecting you when you're on a trip like this. We have them on our mobiles, we have them on our laptops. So do try it out for yourself at nordvpn.com/restispolitics for the best discount available.
Thank you. Now, we've been taking your views on all sorts of things out there. I'm going to put out another one, and I'm going to go around the panel as well for another one-word answer. Is Donald Trump a fascist, Rory?
I refuse to answer. That's a dumb question. I'm not.
Why is that a dumb question?
No, I don't think yes or no is very useful on that. Yeah.
Kamala Harris, who's one of the candidates, has said that Donald Trump is a fascist. And therefore, I think that is a perfectly legitimate question. Marina, do you think he's a fascist?
I think it's, first of all, I think that the term has become just bandied about so ridiculously, like all the time, that it's sort of lost its meaning, which is kind of important because it is an important word. Potentially, yes. So far, no.
He's a fucking fascist. I mean, he's like the fascist of fascists. I mean, you know, you got to have worked with the guy to understand how bad he is. Ask General Kelly. We got him on a show right now. He'd say the guy's a full-on fascist, loved Hitler. You know what Kelly told me? And he's probably going to be mad at me now because it's going to be public. He said to me...
Too late now.
He said to me, so he's praising Hitler's generals, and Hitler had these great generals. He goes, I was trying to tell him, they tried, but they also tried to blow him up a few times.
Yeah.
They weren't that loyal to him. They were trying to blow him up once in a while. The Volkerei operation and so forth. But, Trump was obsessed with Adolf Hitler.
What's your definition of fascism, though? What's your definition of fascism as it relates to Trump?
The definition of fascism is that he would literally call a head of state and say, Alastair Campbell has said bad things about me. I want you to block his business from coming into your country. He has done that. That's fascism. Of course, that's fascism.
It's fascist behaviour.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah, but lots of people who aren't fascists behave like that as well. So I think he's a.
You don't think he's a fascist?
No, I don't. I think because I would say fascism is a time-specific thing that comes about in the debris of the First World War, and I think there are some elements. There are lots of resonances. Don't get me wrong. There are lots of rhetorical similarities. Trump is a populist. He's a nationalist. He's a demagogue.
Do I have time to debate him or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me explain why he's not a fascist.
I got to turn.
He doesn't have a paramilitary force behind him. He doesn't have a cult of war. In fact, quite the opposite. Hitler, great example, trumpeted his service in the trenches. Trump avoided serving because of his draft offense, because of his spurs in his foot or whatever. Trump does not have a plan for aggressive expansion, as fascists so often do. But I think above all, fascism has a kind of an ideological dynamism, a momentum to remake society and to make new men in particular.
You don't think he has that?
And I don't think he has that because I don't think he has an
Do you think the
ideology.
people around him, do you think the Teals and the
Now, there
Musks
may be people
and the
who
Project
are,
2025
there may
people?
well be people who are attracted to a kind of fascism, but I don't think Trump. I think Trump himself is he's an egotist. He is a demagogue. He's a nationalist. He's not a fascist.
Dominic, he has said that he wants to use the American military against his citizens. He told Esper and Milley, shoot at the kneecaps of civilians in Lafayette Square.
Right, but lots of people do that and they're not fascists.
Okay, well, maybe we have a different definition, you and I, of fascism.
Okay.
How about people that say, let's take the FBI out of the Department of Justice and have them report directly to me as my Gestapo?
Well, again, I think you're
How's
talking
that?
about
That's
somebody
not
who is
fascist?
He could be an authoritarian. He could be dictatorial. But is he a fascist with a capital F? I don't think so.
But why do you say fascism
we're gonna
is kind
disagree on
of
that.
is specific to one period of history?
The problem with you
Didn't we-
Brits is that you think that the word fascism is like too glib for your culture, okay? Because you experience fascism and the violence of the fascism, but we've never experienced it here in this country because of your favorite president, FDR. And this guy is a fascist, and this guy will do systemic damage to the system that has made this country the most prosperous and the greatest force. We got problems, we're not perfect, Vietnam, Iraq, etc. But the greatest force for peace in the history of man is a direct result of the decentralization of the power structure and the ability for blokes like me to move from penniless to where I am today, and you can't get there with authoritarians like Trump. He's a horrific human being, he's a total fascist, and you can think what you want, but I'm telling you, I work with the son of a bitch, and if we could get Kelly to dial in here right now, he'd be like, dude, Dominic, he's a
ring and
fascist.
say we want him to come on.
But I don't disagree with any
it.
of that. I don't disagree with any of that. But I'm saying that's not necessary. Being a terrible human being and being an authoritarian or being a nationalist does not make
Me, if you're going to wreck the
we-
system of our
but
government
sure.
and take personal power in control, if you don't think that's the definition of
But
fascism, that's fine. John Kelly and I think it is.
If we step back from the definitions, though, for a second, I think what we can agree on, says he trying to be smarmy here, right?
Yeah.
Is he is a massive threat to the largest and in many ways the greatest democratic experiment in the world. I mean, this is an incredible place that had universal suffrage before most of us, and he's threatening the Constitution. He's a threat to what kind of international order still remains. I mean, we're in a very, very difficult moment where the Israeli Prime Minister has just declared the Secretary General of the United Nations persona non grata, where Sudan is out of control, where we desperately need some sort of leadership, some kind of values. And so I think he's an affront, profound affront to everything that we really care about in terms of the economic future of the world, the democratic future of America, and international security.
This is a
and it
British
doesn't really
thing.
matter whether he's a fascist
I get
or
reprimanded by
yeah,
Katty Kay on the show when I use the word fascist. She's like, you're being too glib.
I think he's a fascist.
We in Britain don't call these people fascists and so on and so forth. But I don't think I'm being too glib. You think he's a fascist?
Well, I'm going
to call John Kelly on the break and see if he wants to call
one
me.
of the most bizarre,
Guy's a batshit fascist, okay? I'm just telling you, you do not want this guy. And by the way, when I am in Guantanamo, okay, hopefully you have leaped over Joe Rogan and you'll be saying, I was on the podcast with Mooch, I was on the live show, he's in Guantanamo, and Trump is a fascist.
One of the most bizarre interviews I did was with my old boss, Tony Blair, for GQ magazine a few years ago. And I said to him, this was a few years ago now, I said, are you not worried about the resonance that exists? This is when Trump was president, between the 30s in Germany and other parts of Europe and what's happening in America now. And he said to me, oh, for God's sake, Alastair, get over this Trump-Hitler thing that you've got. Tony phoned me the day after January 7 and said, you might have a point. Because I think that when you think that the state exists for you, as opposed to that you exist for the state, then I think you are well down that road. I think when you have no respect for the rule of law, when you have no respect for free media, when you have no respect for human rights, you have no respect for the basic citizenship
Huge enemies
people,
list. Huge enemies list.
I think that is fascism.
And we're hoping really that it's just his intense laziness is what prevents him from being a full sort of fascist. Because
There's what our listeners
his
and
attention
viewers are
deficit
saying.
and his dyslexia.
Anthony, there's
he's
what
playing golf,
our
then he's
listeners
not
and
being a
viewers are
fascist.
saying.
All right, good.
60%, 65% yes.
Dominic and I are losing this debate.
Yeah. But I think that's because they're ultimately using a different definition
Yes.
of fascism from the one that I'm using.
But what is
You're
what's
like,
the what's
you're
the
like,
difference
like
between
the
yours and mine?
Oxford Dictionary. I mean,
So you're using the
don't
word
be the
fascist.
Oxford Dictionary.
You're
Look with
using
your
the word
eyes.
fascist to mean
See a
somebody-
fascist, know a fascist. Don't go to the Oxford
No, but hold on a minute.
Dictionary.
The definition
But
is
you're
important,
using
though.
it to mean somebody who is undemocratic, who is narcissistic, who will
He wants to put
That's-
my ass
that's-
in jail over my free speech.
but putting you in jail is not the definition of fascism. I mean, I hate to break it
Should
to
be.
you, but the definition
But it's a
of
symptom of
fascism-
fascism. It's a symptom of
Okay,
fascism.
listen.
It might be a
Dominic,
symptom
You don't
of
need an
fascism.
Dominic,
ideology.
no more makeup for you at the break. I'm just letting you know, I'm cutting you off. Okay, I'm telling.
But there are so
I'm
many.
telling
There are
Patricia, you're not
loads
getting
of-
any more makeup.
There are loads of dictatorial, authoritarian regimes, and how were in the 20th century that would have locked you up, that weren't fascistic.
He does love the idea of a strong man, though. We can agree on that. Marina,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Yes, he absolutely loves the idea of a strong man. He recognises them around the world. But I would say that the people around him trouble me almost more because when he's on the golf course, his work as the president, if he becomes the president, his what they'll be doing in his name, I think, has the potential to be much more dangerous. We might be saved by his laziness.
I think Musk is a fascist. I think Elon Musk is a fascist.
I think Elon Musk, actually, you're on much safer ground.
But I
calling
think-
him a fascist than you are Trump. Because I think Elon Musk.
Well, in which case, Trump is the leader of a group of sovereign individuals who I define as having really fascistic.
So I think
tendencies.
somebody like Musk or his tech allies, they do believe that the world can be remade.
Get rid of
entirely new
democracy,
world, and
make
they
it
do
all about
believe
wealth.
human nature, the human condition,
Yeah.
can be fundamentally changed, as fascists did in the 1920s.
Is Bannon a
1930s.
fascist?
A wannabe. He's a wannabe. He would help a fascist. He's an agent of a fascist.
Yeah.
He's
Fascists
not
are
capable of
sort of utopians.
the charisma
Yeah,
of.
They have sort of,
Fascists are idealists.
Yeah.
They dream of a better tomorrow and a better world.
and people like D'Annunzio behind Mussolini have these sort of strange
Absolutely.
modernist, high modernist
Absolutely. The
visions.
modernism is absolutely central to fascism.
Good. Well, I enjoyed that debate. I think we won, Marina. Mooch. I think we won.
I mean, I don't even.
Trump
I
is a
can't.
fascist.
It's not
Trump
even a
is
debate. I
basically
mean,
a
we got
fascist. I think
to.
that's the thing. I'm completely losing track of time, but I think we're going for a break. Should we go for a break?
Let's take a break.
And then when we
Why
come back,
not?
what should we talk about? What are we going to do? I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Trump and about Kamala Harris, but through the lens of a former colleague of mine, Peter Hyman, who was doing this amazing project about populism and how progressives should take on populism, and who's been spending, the poor guy has been spending the last few months basically talking to Trump supporters. So we'll have him on very, very shortly. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Rest is Politics live stream. We're still going.
Still going,
Not long
going
ago.
strong.
So we're joined now by Peter Hyman, very, very, very old friend of mine, or colleague of mine in opposition
Doesn't look that old.
in the 90s. He's not that old. This amazing story that Peter was worked for us, then worked in Downing Street, then went off to be a teacher, became a head teacher, by all accounts a rather good head teacher, then went back to help Keir Starmer, and is now doing this big project about populism and how we progressives have not really handled populism very well. So you've been spending a lot of time with Trump supporters.
Well, I've been a master of disguise. I've got my two hats here. In the morning, I wear my MAGA hat and go to MAGA rallies, and then very subtly I change in the afternoon.
Oh, you should have been a spy.
Try and go to Kamala Harris.
Is it actually true? Do you actually wear that hat to rallies?
I wear that.
Really?
And one of my messages is that there haven't been quite as many conspiracy theories as people said. But having said that, the last rally I was at, the final one in Pennsylvania yesterday, this woman came up to me and she whispered to me, she said, you know the dash between the 45 and the 47 on the hat, you know what that means? That means that Trump has been the commander-in-chief even during Biden's presidency, and the dash means he's still in charge. And that's why they put it on here.
Do you think it's possible that when we look at those rallies, that 90% of them are anthropologists putting on fake MAGA hats?
well, it might be. But I've spoken to a lot of people, and the main thing I come out with is this idea that a lot of, and it's reflected in your podcast, everyone says, well, how can, the sentence starts, how can anyone be voting for Trump when he is, fill in the blank, racist, misogynistic, unhinged, all the rest of it? And the answer when you speak to people is actually pretty clear, and it's been touched on a bit in this broadcast. First of all, people feel genuinely left out. There's this huge divide between the college-educated, the smug elites on each of the coasts, and the working Americans in the middle, often who haven't gone to college, who feel they are being patronised, who feel they're being told that their views aren't worthy. And in all of this, even in the language of saying, how can they be voting for him, the implication is, how can they be so stupid, these people? But actually, so everyone thinks that Trump support is based on a sort of pack of lies. I think it's actually based on a central truth that he has got to. The central truth is the system over decades has screwed a lot of these people, whether it's through the financial crisis and the crash, or whether it's the way the economy is run. It is not supporting these people, and they feel dislocated, and they feel patronised at the same time, and that comes through very clearly.
And Peter, if you were to say to them, listen, your criticism of the system is completely valid, a lot of things have gone wrong, the elites have screwed up, but in the end, this man is a monster. The way that he treats women is horrible. He lies. He's been convicted of felonies. He tried to mount an insurrection against the Constitution. So, fine, 2008 financial crisis, Iraq, Afghanistan's catastrophe, you've got a lot of things to be angry about, but why this guy?
It's a total misunderstanding of his appeal, almost, to ask that question, because what it's about is about, whose side is he on? It's about what they feel, which is really interesting to me, is they think he's a showbiz guy. They think his great appeal is not being a traditional politician. We're used to that now, but that's the essence of this. So when he does the stuff that he shouldn't really say, that makes us and lots of people foam at the mouth, that how can he possibly be racist in this way, or sexist, or unconstitutional? That is what makes him a different kind of politician.
But don't you feel that with those things that he gives voice to some of their, he's like America's id. Doesn't he say things that people wish they could say? And maybe lots of people hate women, as an example. Like, yes, he is obviously misogynist and whatever, but maybe a lot of other people are too. And maybe him being out there gives a sort of voice to it and licenses it, and just say he exists in a sort of fantasy, unboundaried world that they would quite like to not have to watch themselves in the same way.
Yeah, but it's also this idea that they're being told the whole time there's a woke there's a woke agenda, and they're not playing by the rules of it, and therefore are made to feel stupid.
And the rules are impenetrable, and
the rules
they're always
are impenetrable, and they think there's something amiss. They want their lifestyle of going to church, owning a gun, working very hard. The first person I met at a Trump rally, this is a short story that will exemplify. Really nice, middle-aged man. He said, "I've been a lifelong Democrat. I was a Democrat organizer. I was invited to a fundraising meeting for the Democrats. I bought a new suit. I went along. I sat in the audience. By the end of the meeting, I realized that everyone in the room, every group, whether it was those on benefits or whether it was new immigrants or whether it was single mothers, had all got something for them. And me, as someone working my socks off, who had 2 children to support, who was trying to pay a mortgage, there was nothing for the Democrats for me. And at that point, I left the Democrat Party, and now I'm for Trump.
When you were at the Kamala Harris rallies,
Yeah.
did you see in those audiences the sort of people and the sort of attitudes that the people that you see at the Trump rallies have come to dislike and despise? Or is there any crossover between the two?
I saw there's more single issue interests. So I don't think the majority at the Kamala Harris are in that way rooting for these working people. They
don't?
It's not that they're not, but I think they're more fired up about climate. They're more fired up about abortion and reproductive rights. They're more fired up about Black Lives Matter, all of which are important. But they're less for the sort of people instinctively that Trump is for.
So obviously, many of the people watching are going to be UK listeners, and listening to this, they'll think, okay, this is the sort of account that one got from journalists covering Brexit.
Yeah.
They would go up and they would say things that sound... What do you think the differences are between the way that people described Brexit voters and the way you're describing Trump voters?
Well, I think it's very similar. I think the parallels are very good. The take back control impulse. There's a very good book I recommend to everyone by Arlie Hochschild, who was someone who she was a sociologist who spent 5 years with the Tea Party in Louisiana, who wrote a book, Strangers in Their Own Land. It's from a few years ago. And it's a totally unpatronising book, saying these are people who are working incredibly hard and are just feel left out of the national conversation. And I think, and one thing which I thought was interesting, just to answer your question in a different way, when I was knocking on doors in the British general election, and you'll remember him, Mike O'Brien, I was knocking on doors with, who was a really good minister under the new Labour government. He said to me, the difference here is the people on the doorstep, you're knocking on the doors, they want abrasive politics because they're angry. And what you're offering, the Labour Party is offering, is smooth politics. And in a way, that's a Trump-Harris thing. They want someone to channel a bit of that anger, to say, actually, things aren't right, things aren't fair, we're not getting the breaks we need, and want a bit more of that, not the smooth way.
Sometimes people say that, you know, people who always try to fix the problem, when you're just really angry, you just want someone to sympathise with you.
Yes.
And sometimes, and that is, and I sense a lot of that, is that people want to say, you're right to be angry, almost more than they want someone to say, here's how I'm going to get you out of it.
And Peter, the thing that worries me a bit about this is that I'm slightly worried that you're going to conclude that therefore the rest of us need to get angrier, in which case we're going to end up in an ever more polarised,
I think this is where
polarised, angry politics, because people like you return from the front line, good liberals, and say, well, the liberals now need to get really angry and be more abrasive.
I'm not saying that, but I think this is the big conundrum, because what I am saying is bland, centrist, technocratic, lacking cutting edge, is going to be blown away by the populace who can channel something that isn't confected, it may be exaggerated and amplified, but is real. There is real economic dislocation. There is a real sense in which the college-educated look down at the non-college educated. There's a real sense of male identity as a theme you've touched on before, is a real thing about young men feeling, you know, not knowing what their place is. All these themes are really important, and we've got to understand them.
I know you're doing you're sort of at relatively early stage of this, but have you started to think about what the answer might be to the question that you've set yourself? How do progressives challenge this form of populism?
I think this is only half an answer at this stage, as you say, because it's early days. It's in the area of proper and different storytelling that has more cutting edge and speaks to people that we've talked about. It's about better policy. I think generally the left is hopeless at understanding immigration properly. And it's also pretty poor at cost of living issues. So the left...
And the way the state works.
And the reinvention of the state. So I think there's serious policy heavy lifting in order to solve this. And then I think we've got to be rooted in communities. a lot more. So there's a sort of bottom-up, grassroots understanding the context of how people are living and working not just top-down but bottom-up.
And policing less. I really do feel that people, you have to slightly understand that there are, much as like a family Christmas, and I know everyone now thinks that maybe families, it's Brexit or Trump or whatever, that their family Christmases are toxic or whatever it is, but that people of different ages and different groups may talk in a way that is not slightly, may not be in the exact sort of, within the guardrails of exactly how you think people should speak. But as you say, we are all in a community, and to be able to tolerate things and to make allowances for people, maybe not talking in exactly the right way, because I think people feel completely policed in lots of ways, and it's incredibly unhelpful. And so people might say, oh yeah, but it's the right thing to do. Well, it doesn't matter, because look where it's leading. Look where it's leading to more and more people feeling alienated and going down the road of really sort of quite dark paths and dark populists. And in order to get people back, this is what I sort of felt slightly when I was talking about the manosphere earlier. Like, has the Democrats sort of given up on this? Because I don't see any attempt to reach into that and to try, and particularly of the Harris campaign actually, to reach into that and to try and sort of say, young men, disaffected young men, we are the party for you. I'm not aware of anything at all this campaign that seems to target them at all.
But how could they do that, Marina? I mean, it's so difficult, because what you actually get is Barack Obama or Tim Walz providing a very different model of masculinity. Their appeal is exactly to say that kind of Andrew Tate type of masculinity is not where we're going. They're trying to provide moral guidance and
You're doing it for our politicians. Perhaps it has to go through the person themselves. Richie Torres, someone like that, who people can look at and think, this is not a sort of completely weird person. This is not an alien to me. And maybe it's through individual figures, but I definitely think that sort of at the moment it slightly feels like they have literally no plan how to get to them, and they haven't attempted to.
Did you feel the campaign events you saw, did you feel they were speaking to these people, the sort of people that Marina's talking about? Were they speaking to them at all?
I didn't feel, in terms of the optics of it and how they were doing, I wasn't sure. I mean, there will be some method to what they're doing, because they're very good at the positioning and the data. I didn't think they were going after the white working class of the Midwest states particularly. Now, they may feel they've got other parts of the coalition, and getting women to turn out more on reproductive rights and other things may be enough. We'll find out later tonight whether that's worked.
So just very quickly, I know Alice wants to move on, but this is completely at odds with what we saw at the convention, which was very, very disciplined and focused on middle-class incomes, working-class incomes. There was no talk about any of this sort of woke stuff at all. And so I'm astonished if you're going to Harris conventions. They've given up on the entire narrative of the convention.
No, I'm not saying. I think she's moved to the centre, and she's had her ads are doing a lot of stuff on middle-class tax cuts and all the rest of it. I just think the sort of natural... A lot of people I met in DC who are in think tanks and others said that the identity politics, which has captured the Democrats over the last few years, they're paying the price still, even though she's done well over a few weeks to move more to the centre ground, which I think she has.
Well, listen, thanks for that. Good luck with the project. Sounds very, very interesting. It sounds quite alarming in lots of ways, but I think you're absolutely on the right question, and that is what we've got to think about a lot more closely than we've been doing. Now, there's been some extraordinary stuff going on in Georgia, which is that the polling stations, I think they're going to have to extend voting because there have been some fake bomb threats sent to polling stations. So I guess there was always going to be things like this happening.
There were, but of course the problem is that this plays into the conspiracy theories, because when you keep them open past 7 p.m, the Republicans, if they don't like the result, will say, well, they changed the rules to let their friends get in and vote and this, that and the other. So I think worrying both because calling in bomb threats, and I believe the story is they've mostly been called into areas where African-American voters are more likely to vote. In other words, trying to shut down polling stations where there are more likely to be Democratic votes. But on the other side, once you begin tinkering with the rules around elections, that then gives an opening to people to criticise.
Well, Dominic and the Mooch went out to continue their fight outside, but they've both come back without any scars or any blood at all. You've been talking to people?
No, I still have an outside chance of being a guest on The Rest is History, so he did get the makeup.
You're not going to be a guest, you're going to be presenting.
Yeah.
He's going to be you and Tom Holland.
So the good news is I heard from our producer, Theo Young-Smith, and he says Tom Holland is out. He has taken the L. And
now you're alienating one of my favorite authors now, right? He's going to be mad at me.
Yeah. Now, you've been hearing things. Tell us.
Yeah, so there is some early exit polling data. I guess I would want Rory to react to some of this. So this is coming from, I can't say where it's coming from, unfortunately, because then they'll cut off the information. But Arizona right now, Harris 48, Trump 50. Georgia, Harris 48, Trump 50. Michigan, Harris 50, Trump 48. Quote, Anthony, we think we're going to be able to call Michigan early because of the very large turnout in Democratic precincts. Nevada, Harris 47, Trump 49. North Carolina, they're virtually tied, 49-50. Harris 49, Trump 50. Pennsylvania, they're in a dead heat, 49-49. Wisconsin, a dead heat, 49-49. So as Dominic and I were looking at these, she's in play with the blue wall. If she wins the blue wall and those precincts report, and again, I don't have the layers of which precincts are reporting, because that's also very important. If there's more Republican precincts that have reported, that would be good for Harris. Because that means
if this is accurate, it's obviously losing Georgia will be very worrying. Winning North Carolina would be very positive and would compensate. I mean, they've both got 16 electoral college votes. But as you say, given that it's
very early, it's very early. Remember,
given tied on most of these key
what was also said to me, remember the exit polling had Kerry winning in 2004. These are very early, very preliminary numbers. We're not even at 9 o'clock yet.
Yeah.
But this is some stuff that's coming in, and it's well sourced, but I can't give up the source.
I saw Marina hugging herself in a womb-like, sort of going into a fetal position. So, Marina, there's going to be lots of this.
I know. I told you, I've been hurt before. You know,
it's fine.
I've jinxed it by saying her.
I don't think that would. Do you think the Harris campaign will be a bit spooked by that or not? I don't.
Yeah, listen, it's too early.
Yeah.
It's too early, but it's good data. It's not great data for her. Obviously, she was hoping that the margin of error would go her way. It looks like the polls look pretty accurate, and it's a neck-and-neck race.
Are these exit polls based on people who voted today?
Yes.
Or people? They are all about people who voted today.
It's a form factor for Democrats and Republicans that voted early. They're giving you a rough guess of what they think that composition is, and then it's the exit polling on the ground in the precincts day of the election.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess what we don't know is whether those 49.
Do you have a defibrillator in case Harris loses, though? Because maybe
You have 5.
Well,
it's not going to be. I'm going to say it's not going to be good.
Have you got your bag packed for Guantanamo?
Let me tell you something. If I collapse, don't let these guys give me mouth to mouth. Okay? They have bad British teeth. Okay, just find an American. Okay.
But on your data, Anthony, she can still win that
exactly.
Rust Belt. There is still a
Exactly.
path to victory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a total path to victory. She's neck and neck in those states. And again, we need more time. Let's put it this way. There's no network in America. The Associated Press would never call a campaign based on this. It's just, this is the early data. They're looking at it and they're going, ugh.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we're off air, we're going to be taking a few hours off because you need a bit of a rest after your. Where do you think they're going to get the best coverage? I mean, they could just look back at what we've said already. That'd be quite fun. But where else would you? Where would you go?
What other things would you want to look at?
They could go to bed.
Much better to go to bed.
Eh?
Much better to go to bed.
I've got to say,
what you don't want to do is what I remember doing in 2016, which I was sitting in Britain with Shoshana, the two of us, just looking at that awful New York Times
needle.
ticker, needle moving around.
Yeah.
I went out. I thought I said to my husband, "We'll go out early and we'll eat something, and then we'll come back and watch it." I ate fish tacos and I got food poisoning, so I had this incredibly violent vomiting, and then was watching this thing. And I haven't had a fish taco since, and I always think of it as like this incredible vomiting and this thing happening. I'd come out of the room and be like, oh my God.
It's just for a moment. I mean, it's the most awful
I won't do that tonight.
thing. I continue to believe Kamala Harris will win this election, but in the horrible situation in which she does not, it will be an incredible cultural moment for the world. I mean, it will be completely astonishing, and we will be talking about nothing else for months.
Although winning once, you could say, an aberration, a result of
winning again after all that's happened.
Right, exactly. That's the extraordinary thing, to win again.
Peter Hyman, who we were talking to a moment ago, when I saw him earlier today, he said that his gut feeling was that the big surprise will be if he doesn't win. But he's been immersed in that world. So we'll see. I just saw something flash up there. There's been a record turnout in Georgia. That presumably, is that a good sign for, what do we think about that?
Well, because the Republicans control that state, you'd have to tell me where. If it's around Atlanta, then it's a great sign for her because that's a very large African-American community. But if it's in the suburbs or the rural areas, it's obviously a much better sign for him. But listen, the Republicans control that state, and I would say that's probably not a great sign. And based on this exit polling, probably not a great sign.
Alistair, question for you. There's a lot of talk in these campaigns about surrogates and the idea that Trump doesn't have good enough surrogates, whereas Kamala Harris has better people speaking on her behalf. How much difference do you think that makes, having good surrogates in elections?
I think in a conventional campaign it does, but I just don't think his is a conventional campaign. It's all about him. Even J.D. Vance has been kind of relegated. And I even wondered whether there was extraordinary. Did you see the rally Vance did the other day? There's this huge thing set up. There's about 10 people there. I even wondered, there's no way that they couldn't have organised more people to be there. That struck me as being a bit deliberate.
But do you think
who is the only one who I think he's listening to and seems to have, whether it's real or not, I don't know, he's definitely bought into the whole Musk helping him thing.
Yeah.
Musk has been really significant in this campaign.
And no useful surrogate, presumably, Marina?
But he's contracted out a huge amount of the ground operation to Musk's America PAC. I mean, that may turn out to be a big mistake, or depending on the results that come in, we may see. But yes, he's sort of deferred to him, and he's the only person he's allowed to sort of, it's the big silverback, to kind of be the guy who's giving people $1 million to give them that. He's allowed him to behave in a very Trump-like way, and I think that's kind of interesting. He's felt he needed him for definite.
And without sort of putting you in the restless entertainment spot, I mean, what do you think Musk represents? Do you think who's he appealing to? Is he somebody certain people will look at and think, my goodness, if Musk endorses Trump, there must be something to be said for him? Will he bring new votes over?
He is definitely sort of manosphere. He bought Twitter so that he could be the main character on it, which, by the way, the previous main character on it was Trump, and he withdrew and he went to his own platform because he wants it to be worth billions after the election. And yes, I think people think that people think that Musk is a sort of, and he did just capture a rocket with some chopsticks. I mean, it's quite difficult, but he's also very bad. But what you're seeing, I think, with him particularly, is this kind of almost live on stage. If Trump wins, and you watch the sort of birth of an American oligarchy live on stage, someone who is paying to influence the election quite openly. I mean, with giant checks. I mean, there's obviously always been like billionaire money in American politics, but actually the richest man in the world just giving big checks to people on stage, and a judge basically allowing it yesterday. If you don't think there's going to be more and more of that, because all of these people want something, and they all want something from Trump, and he's a transactional guy, and they expect something, and they will probably get it if he wins.
I don't know why we even call him people like that donors. They are oligarchs. That is what they are. They're no different to oligarchs in the places where we do talk about oligarchs. Mooch, what do you think DJT will be doing right now, and how will he be feeling?
Well, if he saw those polls, he would be upset.
Because?
It's interesting. We're seeing those. I'm a Harris supporter. I'm seeing those polls. I'm upset, but he's upset because he doesn't think that it's wide. He's the opposite. He's the doppelganger of Rory. He's thinking all the things are breaking my way. I'm going to be up 4 or 5 points, and I'm going to win 6 of the 7.
So all that's telling us is what we know, which is pretty close.
Pretty close.
And these numbers will be quite small.
But to Marina's point, he always finds somebody. You have to think about the opportunism. You have to think about the magnet that is Donald Trump. He always finds people to come work for him. Howard Lutnick, Linda McMahon, Elon Musk,
Anthony Scaramucci.
And so somebody sent me and if I can find it, I'll show it to you guys on the next show. It was like a rotisserie. You come in, they hand you a MAGA hat. As you go by Trump, he stabs you in the back. And then the new employee comes in, they hand you the MAGA hat, you're waving, stabs you in the back. And everyone's had that happen to them, myself included. But when you're coming in waving, you don't think it's going to happen to you.
Sure.
Musk will be finished with them. J.D. Vance will be finished with them. Lutnick will be finished with them.
But-
you pick whoever it is, they'll be finished with them.
But there'll be a new lot.
But he's on
coming
the
up.
There'll be
second.
a new group.
People like Nelson Peltz, the billionaire Brooklyn Beckham's father-in-law. He fell out with him once, and now he's back.
In-joke viewer, I challenged her to get Brooklyn Beckham into the,
And now I've
into
done
the
it.
conversation. She's
But
like,
actually, he is Brooklyn Beckham's father-in-law. Now he had the sort of falling out with Trump after the first thing, and now he's back in. You know, they're coming back round again. They're the sort of people he's going to cancel.
Steve Schwartzman.
Yeah.
All those guys said, we're done with Trump
Yeah.
after the insurrection, but power is an aphrodisiac, everybody. Power is a Velcro.
Now, I've got to say, I could carry on doing this for hours, but apparently I've been told we've got to stop quite soon. I'm really hurt about that. I'd just keep going all night, wouldn't you?
We do different. Well, I could have a little snooze under the table.
But
You guys could keep going.
right now, are going to go big, full energy for Saley.
Oh, God, thank God.
Right.
Okay, so just want to let Dominic Sandbrook know that Trump is a fascist, but that's separate from Saley. And I just want to thank our sponsor, Saley. You guys are amazing. It's a phenomenal technology. I have it on my phone. It's effectively an eSIM, so you can forget all the roaming charges out there when you're traveling around the world. I want to thank Alastair Campbell, my tech guru, for introducing me. And if you want to be part of our family, and we definitely want you to be, we want you to join Saley, and you can go to our website, and it would be saley.com/tripus. So that's saley.com/TRIPUS, and you get a 15% discount because we want to show you our love. Please sign up with Saley.
Isn't that beautiful?
So I'm really being
getting better at it.
Almost as good as your normal.
I'm getting better. I'm getting better
Very
at it.
good.
So that is round one over, the stage set. We're going to be back here at 5 a.m. UK time. That is midnight Eastern time in the States. We're going to go into the results as they come in. Thank you so much to everybody who subscribed, watched, or sent in a question. We want more later. We'll be back again live from New York City in 5 hours' time. See you then. Bye-bye.